Welcome back, my friend. Tonight we're stepping aboard a Viking longship just before sunrise, where the air bites your cheeks and the sea seems determined to remind every traveller who truly rules these northern waters. Have you ever wondered how anyone could willingly sail across icy seas without the comfort of a warm fire, or why generations of Viking sailors accepted such journeys as an ordinary part of life tonight? You will discover that survival depended less on fearless bravery than on careful preparation, practical knowledge, and remarkable endurance. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, leave a comment telling me your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights. You stand at the edge of a quiet fjord while the first pale light touches the snow resting high above the dark cliffs. The sea barely moves. Even the gulls seem reluctant to break the silence. The morning smells of salt, damp wood, and cold stone. Every breath feels sharp inside your chest. Tiny clouds escape your mouth before disappearing into the still air. Around you, men and women move without unnecessary conversation. Nobody rushes. Nobody wastes energy. Every motion has been practiced through years of living beside these northern waters. The longship waits patiently. Its curved bow rises above the gentle waves like the neck of a patient animal. Fresh tar darkens the overlapping wooden planks. Moisture glistens across the hull, reflecting the weak northern sun. You run your fingers along the smooth timber. It feels surprisingly warm compared to the surrounding air. Wood stores yesterday's sunlight longer than stone. A small comfort that experienced sailors certainly appreciate. Contrary to popular imagination, Viking voyages rarely began with dramatic shouting or wild celebrations. Most departures were calm, deliberate affairs. A successful voyage depended upon organization long before the sail ever caught the wind. Every bundle matters. Ropes are inspected one final time. Spare oars lie secured along the benches. Water barrels sit tightly wedged against shifting waves. Food supplies disappear beneath protective coverings. You notice something missing. There is no crackling fire. That might sound obvious today. But the absence becomes surprisingly noticeable once you imagine spending weeks surrounded by freezing seawater. Fire and wooden ships formed a dangerous partnership. Even a carefully controlled flame could threaten an entire vessel covered in tar, pitch, dry rope, and timber. Instead, warmth must come from somewhere else. That realization changes everything. You begin to understand that surviving these northern waters is less about creating heat than about protecting every little bit your own body already produces. The breeze strengthens. It slips beneath your clothing with quiet determination, searching for every gap. The sailors adjust their cloaks without complaint. Nobody fights the wind directly. Instead, they work with it, adapting naturally after countless seasons. Historians generally agree that Viking sailors relied heavily on practical experience passed through families and local communities. Children growing up near the Scandinavian coast learned early how quickly cold punished carelessness. Experience became protection, perhaps more valuable than any weapon. Nearby, an older sailor quietly studies the sky. His weathered face shows little emotion. He notices details invisible to newcomers, a slightly different cloud formation, a change in the smell carried by the breeze, tiny ripples spreading across otherwise calm water. Nothing escapes him. You wonder how many voyages those careful eyes have witnessed. Hundreds, perhaps. The smell of fresh pine mingles with tar and seawater. Somewhere behind you, someone cuts dried fish into smaller portions for the coming days. The salty aroma briefly overpowers everything else. Breakfast is simple. Nobody expects luxury before departure. As more crew members arrive, you notice that everyone carries surprisingly little personal equipment. Space aboard a longship is precious. Every unnecessary item steals room from food, tools, or supplies needed for survival. Traveling light matters very much. The benches where rowers will eventually sit look unforgiving. Hardwood offers no comfort. Yet these same benches will become seats, workstations, and sometimes beds during long journeys. Life aboard the ship constantly changes. A place for rowing becomes a dining area. A sleeping place becomes storage. Every surface serves several purposes before the voyage ends. Some modern illustrations show Vikings wearing enormous horned helmets while sailing across icy seas. That famous image remains one of history's most persistent myths. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests that practical helmets, when worn at all during travel, lacked those dramatic horns entirely. The real sailors preferred usefulness. That sounds much wiser. As you continue watching preparations, you notice nobody complains about the temperature. It is not because they enjoy freezing conditions. Rather, the cold forms such a familiar companion that wasting words on it accomplishes nothing. The sea offers no sympathy. Neither does winter. A raven lands briefly upon a nearby rock before taking flight again. Several sailors quietly watch the bird disappear toward the distant shoreline. Birds often provided useful clues about nearby land, changing weather, or shifting conditions during coastal travel. Nature constantly speaks. Only attentive people hear it. Historians still argue whether every Viking captain relied equally upon traditional signs from birds, waves, and wildlife, or whether individual experience mattered far more than inherited knowledge. The surviving evidence leaves room for thoughtful debate. Either way, careful observation clearly shaped countless successful voyages. You begin helping load another heavy barrel. The rough wood presses firmly against your palms. Cold moisture soaks into your sleeves. Your muscles immediately warm from the effort. Movement feels comforting. Standing still does not. That simple lesson becomes obvious within minutes. The people loading supplies remain warmer than those waiting quietly nearby. Physical activity quietly replaces the warmth another culture might have expected from a fire. Soon the sail is raised halfway. The woven wool catches the morning breeze with a gentle fluttering sound. It smells faintly of lanolin, seawater, and countless previous journeys. The sound becomes strangely soothing, almost hypnotic. You glance once more toward the settlement behind you. Thin columns of smoke rise from warm homes where families prepare ordinary breakfasts beside glowing hearths. Out here, that comfort ends. Ahead lies only open water. You feel excitement mixed with uncertainty. The horizon appears endless beneath a pale northern sky. Somewhere beyond it wait distant shores, unfamiliar weather, valuable trade, possible danger, and stories yet to unfold. The longship gently rocks beneath your feet. The voyage has not truly begun. Yet already you understand something important. These sailors never expected the sea to become comfortable. They prepared instead to become resilient enough that comfort mattered less with every passing mile. It is a quiet kind of courage. Perhaps the strongest kind. The ropes are untied. The current slowly carries the ship away from shore while the familiar sounds of the village fade behind you. Ahead, only waves, wind, and patient endurance remain. The icy sea is waiting, and so are you. The shoreline slowly fades behind you until the familiar houses become little more than pale shapes against dark forests. Soon they disappear entirely. Ahead, only grey water stretches beneath an equally grey sky. The wind grows colder. You instinctively pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The movement feels natural, yet an older sailor quietly adjusted again. He tucks one edge beneath a leather belt, smooths another fold across your chest, and nods with quiet approval. There is no lecture, just experience. You quickly realize that clothing aboard a Viking longship is not merely something you wear. It is part of your survival equipment. Every layer matters. Every fold serves a purpose. Even the smallest opening allows the relentless northern wind to steal warmth your body cannot easily replace. The wool scratches your neck. Oddly enough, that rough texture brings comfort. Unlike soft modern fabrics, coarse wool continues insulating even after becoming damp. It traps tiny pockets of warm air close to your skin, while allowing moisture to escape more effectively than many people might expect. That simple quality saves lives. Generations of Scandinavian shepherds unknowingly contributed to countless successful voyages simply by raising hardy sheep capable of producing thick, resilient fleece. Historians generally agree that wool formed the foundation of Viking clothing. Archaeological discoveries from graves and settlements repeatedly reveal woven wool garments in remarkable variety. Linen often rested beneath the wool, providing a lighter layer against the skin during less severe weather. Today, however, warmth comes first. Fashion waits ashore. You notice several crew members wearing garments dyed deep blue, earthy green, or reddish brown, contrary to popular imagination. Viking clothing was not always dull grey or muddy brown. Natural dyes created surprisingly colourful fabrics. Especially for people with greater wealth, colour survives. Even in cold places, a gust of wind sweeps across the deck. It slips around your face like icy water poured directly onto your skin. Instinctively, you lower your head. The older sailor beside you simply turns slightly sideways, presenting less of himself to the wind. Small adjustments matter. They always do. Your leather shoes feel stiff beneath your feet. Thick woolen socks fill every empty space inside them. They are not waterproof by modern standards, yet they provide insulation even after becoming damp. Dry feet remain a luxury. Warm feet remain a necessity. You begin noticing how little exposed skin exists among experienced sailors. Wrists disappear beneath sleeves. Necklines remain high. Cloaks overlap carefully across the chest. Even heads receive generous protection from wool caps or fur-lined hoods whenever conditions demand. No one leaves gaps. The wind notices everything. The smell of lanolin rises faintly whenever the breeze shifts. Fresh wool naturally contains oils that help repel moisture, although much of that protective grease disappears during processing. Enough often remains to give garments their familiar scent. It is earthy, comfortingly so. You rub your hands together. The friction creates a brief sensation of warmth before fading almost immediately. One sailor quietly laughs, not unkindly, then hands you a pair of wool mittens connected by a simple cord threaded through your sleeves. You immediately understand. Losing a mitten overboard would be surprisingly easy. Losing both could become genuinely dangerous. Simple solutions often outlast complicated inventions. As the ship glides steadily northward, sunlight briefly escapes through thinning clouds. The warmth barely touches your face before disappearing again. Still, every sailor seems to appreciate those fleeting moments. The sun becomes a companion, an unpredictable one. Scholars continue debating exactly how Viking sailors balance practical clothing with changing weather conditions during long voyages. Some researchers argue crews carried numerous spare garments whenever possible. Others believe limited storage forced sailors to rely more heavily upon drying and repairing the clothing already on their backs. The evidence remains incomplete. The sea rarely preserves fabric kindly. You notice a young sailor carefully mending a torn sleeve using bone needles and sturdy wool thread. His movements appear almost automatic. Repairing clothing while travelling clearly forms another ordinary skill rather than an exceptional talent. Nothing useful is wasted, especially warmth. The steady rhythm of waves against the hull creates a gentle background sound. Splash, pause, splash, pause. It almost resembles slow breathing. Soon your own breathing matches it. The ocean quietly sets the pace. Another sailor adjusts the collar around your neck once more. This time you understand why. A tiny opening had allowed cold air to creep inside every few seconds. Such a small gap, such a large difference. The lesson seems almost unfair. Survival depends less upon dramatic act of courage than upon dozens of tiny decisions repeated every hour. Pull the hood forward, tighten the belt, shake water from the sleeves, cover your ears, keep moving. Each action appears insignificant by itself. Together, they quietly resist the cold. A faint smell of smoked fish drifts from one of the storage chests. Nearby, someone unwraps a small piece of hard cheese. Another sailor shares dried berries collected during the previous summer. Food waits patiently. The body never does. You begin understanding that clothing and nutrition work together. Warm garments slow heat loss. Food replaces the energy needed to create that heat in the first place. Remove either one, and the balance quickly collapses. Nothing exists alone. Everything connects. A curious story circulates among the crew about one famous sailor who supposedly refused heavy cloaks to prove his toughness. According to the tale, he spent more time shivering than rowing and earned little admiration before finally accepting extra wool. Whether true or not, everyone smiles. The lesson remains clear. Pride cannot warm frozen shoulders. The breeze strengthens again, carrying the distant cries of seabirds somewhere beyond the mist. You cannot see them, yet their voices echo softly across the water. The sound feels reassuring. Land cannot be impossibly far away if birds still visit these waters. Historians still argue whether certain regional clothing styles reflected cultural identity more strongly than practical adaptation to climate. Excavations reveal considerable variation across Scandinavia, suggesting local traditions often influence garments alongside environmental needs. Perhaps both explanations hold truth. Human history rarely chooses only one answer. As afternoon approaches, moisture begins collecting upon your cloak. Tiny droplets shimmer before disappearing into the thick fibers. The garment grows heavier but continues trapping warmth remarkably well. You expected misery. Instead, you discover quiet resilience. Your shoulders ache slightly beneath the weight of damp wool, yet the discomfort remains manageable. The body gradually accepts burdens that once seemed unbearable. That realization feels strangely encouraging. The longship continues forward with calm determination. Its sail swells gently above you while the sea whispers against weathered planks. Around you, every sailor wears centuries of accumulated knowledge woven directly into cloth, leather, fur, and careful habit. No glowing hearth accompanies this journey. No comforting fire crackles nearby. Instead, countless ordinary decisions, repeated faithfully every day, become the invisible warmth that carries you farther into the northern sea. Morning arrives almost unnoticed. The horizon slowly changes from charcoal grey to soft silver, while the sea remains restless beneath the longship. A light mist hovers above the water, hiding distant waves and making the world feel smaller than it truly is. You pull a slow breath into your lungs. The air smells clean, salty, and incredibly cold. It almost burns. The ship has now left the shelter of the fjords behind. There are no towering cliffs to soften the wind. No quiet coves waiting just around the next bend. Only open water stretches in every direction, rising and falling beneath an endless northern sky. The sea feels alive. Not angry, simply indifferent. That difference matters. Many modern stories describe Vikings as fearless conquerors, battling enormous storms every day. The reality was often far less dramatic. Most successful sailors avoided dangerous weather whenever possible. They respected the sea because overconfidence usually ended badly. Experience encouraged caution, not recklessness. The breeze freshens as the morning continues. Soon it becomes a steady wind flowing across the water with nothing to interrupt its path. It gathers speed over every mile of open sea before striking your face with surprising force. Unlike air on land, this wind never seems tired. It keeps coming, again and again. You quickly discover that cold air alone is uncomfortable. Cold air combined with dampness becomes something entirely different. Tiny droplets of seawater begin riding the wind. At first they barely seem noticeable. Then another wave breaks against the bow, sending fine spray drifting across the deck. Your beard becomes wet. Your sleeves sparkle with moisture. Your eyelashes collect tiny droplets. The water feels harmless for only a moment. Soon the breeze steals its warmth. You understand why experienced sailors quietly wipe seawater from exposed skin whenever possible. The water itself is not the greatest enemy. What happens afterward is evaporation begins immediately. Your body pays the cost, Historians generally agree that cold sea water presented one of the greatest everyday dangers during northern voyages. Falling overboard was certainly deadly, but simply remaining wet for long periods steadily drained energy from even the strongest crew members. The sea never hurried, neither did the cold. You noticed the older sailor from yesterday brushing moisture from his wool cloak using the back of his hand. He does not wait until it becomes soaked. He removes water whenever he has the chance. Small habits return once again. Quiet habits, useful habits. The rhythm of the ship changes as larger swells begin lifting the hull. First the bow climbs gently upward, then it pauses for a heartbeat before sliding down the opposite side. Up, pause, down. The motion soon becomes almost hypnotic. Loose ropes creak softly against polished wood. Oars tap gently inside their holders, somewhere behind you. A barrel shifts slightly before another sailor wedges it firmly back into place. Every sound matters. Each one tells a story about the ship. The smell of tar grows stronger whenever sunlight warms the deck. Mixed with salt and damp timber, it creates an aroma unlike anything found ashore. You begin associating that scent with safety. The ship itself becomes home. A sudden gust sweeps across the sea. This time it arrives with enough force to make everyone react at once. Cloaks tighten, hoods rise, hands instinctively reach for ropes and railings. No one panics. Nobody needs to. The response feels almost choreographed. You follow their example, lowering your shoulders and keeping your balance as the longship leans gently beneath the pressure of the wind. Only afterward do you realize how naturally the crew move together. Practice creates calm, not luck. A wave strikes the bow with a loud splash. Cold spray flies across the deck before landing squarely against your face. The shock steals your breath for an instant. Your cheeks sting. Your nose tingles. The water trickles beneath your collar before disappearing into your clothing. You gasp quietly. The older sailor smiles without mockery. He has clearly experienced this thousands of times. He simply gestures toward the horizon, encouraging you to keep looking forward instead of focusing on the discomfort. Soon another wave arrives, then another. You stop flinching quite so much. The sea teaches quickly. One of the rowers quietly points toward a darker patch of water several hundred yards ahead. At first you cannot see anything unusual. Then the light changes. The darker water marks a current moving beneath the surface. It twists gently around invisible underwater features before blending back into the surrounding sea. The captain notices it immediately. The ship alters course only slightly. Just enough. Mainstream historians believe Viking sailors became exceptionally skilled at recognizing subtle changes in currents, wave patterns, and wind behavior. Such observations reduced unnecessary risks and improved travel efficiency across familiar waters. The sea left clues. Experienced eyes noticed them. A curious tale spreads quietly among the crew during the afternoon. Some claim unusually calm patches of water hide enormous sea creatures resting below the surface. Others laugh softly and suggest the true danger comes from unseen currents instead. Perhaps both stories served a purpose. One entertained, the other warned. Either way, every sailor remembers to treat strangely calm water with caution. Historians still argue whether legendary sea monsters reflected genuine attempts to describe unfamiliar marine animals or simply transformed dangerous natural conditions into memorable stories passed between generations. The answer remains uncertain. The legends continue. Clouds gather overhead as the day grows older. The sunlight fades until sea and sky almost merge into a single grey world. Without distant landmarks, judging direction suddenly feels much more difficult. You understand how easily someone unfamiliar with these waters could become disoriented. The horizon offers few answers, only questions. A light drizzle begins, not enough to soak everything immediately, just enough to remind you that moisture never rests for long. Tiny drops land softly upon your hands before blending with salt already covering your skin. The combination leaves your fingers slightly sticky. It feels strange, entirely unforgettable. The crew carries on without complaint. One sailor quietly hums an old melody while checking the lashing securing the cargo. Another adjusts the sail by only a few inches, responding to a subtle shift in the wind. Nobody wastes movement. Energy matters. The farther you travel from shore, the more obvious that truth becomes. Every unnecessary action burns warmth. Every efficient action preserves it. As evening approaches, the sea settles once again. Gentle rolling waves replace the sharper chop from earlier in the day. The longship glides more smoothly across the water. For now, the Northern Ocean rarely remains predictable for long. You rest one hand against the smooth gunwale. The wood feels cool but reassuring beneath your fingers. This vessel has crossed these waters many times before. It knows the journey, or at least it almost seems to. You glance across the quiet faces surrounding you. Their survival does not come from extraordinary strength alone. It comes from respecting wind, water, cold, and countless small dangers before those dangers become overwhelming. Out here, the sea demands patience. The crew answers with discipline, and together they continue north, one steady wave at a time. The daylight slips away almost without warning. One moment the sea reflects a pale silver glow. The next, the horizon dissolves into soft shades of blue and grey. Evening in the northern waters arrives quietly, wrapping the longship in cool shadows rather than dramatic darkness. The wind eases. For the first time all day, the air feels almost gentle. Almost. You notice several crew members stretching sore shoulders and rubbing stiff hands. Hours of rowing, balancing, and working against the movement of the sea have left every muscle quietly exhausted. Fatigue settles slowly. The cold settles faster. Back home, night usually means gathering around a warm hearth. Flames dance across timber walls while food cooks nearby. Family voices fill the room with familiar sounds. Tonight, none of that exists. The longship carries no comforting fireplace, only open sky. You suddenly understand why sleeping aboard such a vessel required a completely different way of thinking. Comfort was never the goal. Recovery was. The captain quietly surveys the sea before giving a few calm instructions. There is no shouting. Every sailor already knows the evening routine through long habit. The sail is lowered. Loose equipment is secured. Water barrels are checked once more. Nothing rattles unnecessarily. A peaceful ship sleeps better. The sea has become calmer, yet the vessel continues its slow rise and fall across gentle swells. Every movement transfers through the wooden hull into your legs. The deck never truly stops moving. Not for a single heartbeat. You choose a place along one of the rowing benches. Earlier, it served as your workstation. Now it will become your bed. Calling it a bed feels generous. It remains a plank of wood. You spread a folded wool cloak beneath your hips before wrapping another around your shoulders. The timber beneath you feels surprisingly firm, yet not unbearable. You quickly notice another lesson. The body warms the wood. Given enough time, even a hard bench becomes slightly more welcoming than bare air. Several sailors sit shoulder to shoulder instead of spreading apart. At first you assume space is limited. Then you realize another reason. Shared warmth matters. Not dramatically, not magically, just enough. Every person gives off a little heat. Sitting close together allows some of that warmth to remain instead of disappearing immediately into the cold night air. Historians generally agree that Viking crews relied heavily upon shared body warmth while resting during long voyages. Although privacy became limited, cooperation often outweighed personal comfort. No one expected luxury. Everyone expected survival. The smell of damp wool fills the evening air. Mixed with tar, salt water, and weathered timber, it forms the unmistakable scent of life aboard a northern ship. It is oddly comforting now. Your nose has grown accustomed to it. Somewhere nearby, someone quietly chews dried fish. Another sailor drinks a careful mouthful of water before sealing the barrel again. Resources remain precious. Even while sleeping, a soft conversation begins near the stern. Nobody speaks loudly. Their voices blend with the gentle slap of waves against the hull. You cannot hear every word. You do not need to. The familiar rhythm itself feels reassuring. The stars slowly appear overhead as clouds drift apart. Thousands of tiny lights scatter across the sky until the darkness seems less empty. You stare upward. The sky feels enormous, without city lights or smoke. Every constellation appears astonishingly clear. Experienced sailors occasionally glance upward, quietly confirming direction while also admiring the familiar heavens. The stars become companions, silent companions. Scholars continue discussing exactly how often Viking navigators relied upon celestial observation during ordinary coastal voyages compared with open ocean crossings. Practical experience probably varied according to weather, season, and individual knowledge. The night keeps some of its secrets. You pull your cloak tighter around your chin. Cold air slips inside anyway. Not much, just enough to remind you it remains awake while you grow tired. The bench beneath your back feels uneven. Every knot in the timber presses gently against your shoulders. You shift slightly before finding a better position. It is never perfect. Eventually it becomes acceptable. One sailor nearby removes his shoes for a few minutes before carefully checking his feet. Another massages tired calves after hours at the oars. These quiet routines repeat every evening. Maintenance never ends, not even for people. A curious story passes softly between two older crew members. They speak about a legendary sailor who supposedly slept through an entire storm because years at sea had made the motion of the waves feel as natural as breathing. Everyone smiles. Nobody seems entirely convinced. Still, after today's constant rocking, the tale suddenly feels possible. Perhaps the sea itself teaches sleep. Historians still argue whether Viking crews normally slept in short rotating periods while others remained alert, or whether calmer conditions sometimes allowed larger portions of the crew to rest simultaneously. Different voyages likely demanded different solutions. Flexibility often mattered more than fixed rules. The wind shifts again. This time it carries the faint scent of seaweed from somewhere beyond the darkness. Perhaps land lies farther away than the smell suggests. Or perhaps the current simply carries familiar scents across remarkable distances. Nature enjoys surprises. The ship creaks softly. Each plank answers the movement of the waves with quiet wooden whispers. Instead of sounding fragile, the vessel almost seems alive. You begin recognizing individual noises, a rope tightening, a mast settling, water brushing gently against the hull. Nothing feels alarming. Everything feels familiar. Your eyelids grow heavier, not because the bench has become comfortable, because the day has demanded every ounce of your attention. Exhaustion proves surprisingly effective. The sea rocks you gently from side to side while your breathing gradually slows. Nearby, another sailor quietly snores beneath layers of wool. No one complains. Sleep arrives whenever it can. The temperature drops further during the deepest part of the night. Tiny beads of moisture gather upon exposed wood before glistening beneath starlight. You tuck one hand beneath your opposite arm. The warmth returns slowly, patiently. You think briefly about the warm homes left behind at the edge of the fjord. Their fires continue burning long after sunset. Out here, the crew is something different. Preparation, discipline, shared experience. Those become the invisible blankets covering everyone aboard the longship. The sea continues breathing beneath you, slowly, steadily, without asking permission. The rhythm of the waves gradually replaces every anxious thought until even the cold feels like another ordinary companion, travelling quietly through the endless northern night. A faint glow spreads across the eastern horizon long before the sun itself appears. The stars quietly fade, one by one, until only the brightest remain. Around you, the crew slowly stirs beneath layers of wool and fur. No alarm is needed. The sea keeps its own schedule. You sit up carefully, feeling every hour spent on the hard rowing bench. Your shoulders complain first. Your lower back follows a moment later. A few sailors stretch silently while others simply stand and begin working. Movement feels welcome. Warmth follows movement. The air is colder than yesterday. A thin layer of frost clings to the edges of several ropes, sparkling briefly before disappearing beneath busy hands. Moisture has settled across the deck during the night, Leaving the timber slick beneath your boots, you steady yourself. Balance comes before breakfast. The smell reaches you before the food does. Smoked fish, salted meat, freshly opened butter, a hint of sour grain bread. None of it sounds especially luxurious. Yet after a long, cold night, every aroma feels strangely inviting. Your stomach agrees. The morning meal begins without ceremony. Small portions pass from hand to hand with practiced fairness. Nobody grabs more than needed. Nobody lingers over the food. Every bite serves a purpose. Out here, eating is not simply pleasure, it is fuel. You accept a strip of dried cod. The fish feels firm between your fingers, almost stiff enough to resemble carved wood. You bite carefully, chewing slowly until it softens. The flavor is deeply salty, almost overwhelming at first. Soon your mouth adjusts. Beside it comes a thick slice of coarse barley bread. It is dense, slightly sour, and heavy enough to satisfy hunger for hours. A sailor spreads a thin layer of butter across the surface before handing it to you. The butter surprises you. It remains firm despite the journey, protected by the cold itself. Nature becomes the pantry. Historians generally agree that preserved foods form the backbone of Viking voyages. Fresh meat spoiled quickly, especially during longer expeditions. Instead, crews depended upon smoked fish, dried meat, hard bread, butter, cheese, oats, and occasionally fermented dairy products. Nothing fancy, everything practical. You notice there are no steaming bowls, no bubbling stew, no kettle suspended above cheerful flames. The absence of hot food feels almost strange after several days aboard. Yet the crew barely seems to notice. They never expected warm meals at sea. That expectation stayed on land. Fire aboard a wooden longship presented obvious dangers, particularly when the vessel pitched unexpectedly. A single accident could ignite sailcloth, rope, or tarred planks with terrifying speed. The safest fire was often no fire. That decision forced the Vikings to think differently about nutrition. Instead of relying upon warmth from cooking, they relied upon foods rich in fat and energy. The body became the furnace. The meal continues quietly. Someone passes around a small pouch containing dried berries gathered during the previous summer. Their sharp sweetness briefly cuts through the salty flavors dominating breakfast. It feels like sunshine, captured months ago. A younger sailor cracks a joke about the berries disappearing faster than silver coins at a market. Soft laughter spreads across the crew before fading naturally into the steady sounds of the voyage. Humor survives the cold, perhaps better than expected. You chew another piece of smoked meat. The smoky aroma lingers pleasantly while the dense texture demands patience. Fast eating accomplishes little. Slow chewing helps. One older crew member quietly reminds a newcomer to drink water, even though the air feels cold enough to suppress thirst. The advice seems wise. Cold often disguises dehydration. Modern research supports what experienced sailors probably understood through observation alone, even in freezing conditions. The body continuously loses moisture through breathing, physical labor, and exposure to dry winter air. The sea surrounds you. Fresh water remains precious. Large barrels rest securely beneath protective coverings. Each one represents careful planning before departure. Running short of drinking water would quickly transform an uncomfortable voyage into a dangerous one. Every sip matters, more than you realize. A faint breeze carries the scent of the ocean across the deck. Mixed with smoked fish and damp wool, it creates a strangely satisfying atmosphere. The smells now seem familiar, almost welcoming. As breakfast ends, the crew carefully stores every remaining scrap. Even hardened crumbs disappear into cloth bags for later use. Waste feels almost unimaginable. Supplies have to last. You watch one sailor scrape the last traces of butter from a small wooden container using a piece of bread. Nothing edible remains behind. Efficiency appears everywhere, not only in sailing. Historians still argue about the exact variety of foods available during especially long Viking voyages into unfamiliar regions. Archaeological evidence offers valuable clues. but many details remain uncertain because organic materials rarely survive the passing centuries. The menu changes. The uncertainty remains. A curious tale circulates among the crew while they finish eating. One sailor claims an ancestor survived an unusually harsh voyage by trading nearly everything he owned for a single barrel of butter before departure. Another sailor laughs. "Smart bargain," he quietly replies. Whether the story happened exactly that way hardly matters. Everyone understands the lesson. Fat means warmth. Warmth means strength. Strength means another day at sea. You begin noticing how food influences the mood of the crew. Faces appear more alert. Conversation grows slightly livelier. Shoulders straighten as energy quietly returns. Breakfast restores more than muscles. It steadies spirits. Soon the rowing benches fill once again. Oars slide into position with soft wooden clicks. The familiar rhythm of work returns almost effortlessly. Pull, recover. Pull, recover. Each stroke burns calories consumed only minutes earlier. The connection becomes obvious. Without enough food, the crew could never maintain this demanding pace for long. Every mile travelled depends upon meals prepared months before the voyage even began. Summer feeds winter. The seasons cooperate. Clouds drift slowly overhead, allowing pale sunlight to spread across the water. Tiny reflections dance between the waves, making the sea appear almost friendly. Only almost. The Northern Ocean rarely abandons its serious nature for long. You glance toward the storage area where the remaining provisions wait patiently beneath layers of cloth and leather. Those simple bundles contain the difference between confidence and desperation. Every preserved fish, every loaf of hard bread, every wheel of cheese. Each one quietly protects the crew as surely as any shield carried into battle. The wind freshens slightly. The sail fills. The longship answers by gliding steadily forward across the cold grey sea. Your stomach feels comfortably full. Your body feels warmer, not because of any hidden fire, because the meal itself has become the flame burning steadily within you, carrying its quiet warmth into another long northern day. The morning meal settles comfortably inside you, while the sea stretches endlessly toward the horizon. The longship glides through a calm patch of water before the captain quietly raises one hand. It is time. The oars return. You take your place beside the others, sliding onto the familiar rowing bench. The smooth wooden shaft rests in your hands, polished by generations of sailors who gripped this same place long before your voyage began. The wood feels cool, not unpleasantly so, around you. Every rower adjusts their feet against the crossbeam beneath the bench. Shoulders roll backward. Fingers tighten around the handles. Nobody rushes. The rhythm matters more than speed. The captain gives a short command. The first stroke enters the water almost silently. Then another. Soon 20 oars move together like the legs of a single enormous creature crossing the northern sea. Pull, lift, recover, repeat. The motion quickly fills your entire world. Your back leans forward. Your legs press firmly against the deck. Your arms guide rather than force the oar through the water. You expected rowing to be an exercise for the shoulders alone. Instead, nearly every muscle joins the effort. Your legs provide power. Your back carries much of the load. Even your stomach tightens with every stroke. The whole body works. Nothing rests for long. Within minutes, your breathing deepens. The cold air enters your lungs sharply before leaving in slow white clouds. At first, you notice only the effort. Soon you notice something else. You are warmer. Not dramatically, not comfortably, but undeniably warmer. The steady movement generates heat far more effectively than sitting beneath layers of wool while remaining still. Sweat threatens to form beneath your clothing. Yet experienced rowers avoid pushing themselves too hard. Too much sweat becomes another danger. Damp clothing cools quickly. Historians generally agree that physical activity played a crucial role in helping Viking crews endure freezing conditions. Rowing kept circulation active while also moving the ship whenever the wind proved unreliable. The oars served two purposes: transportation and survival. The sea responds differently now. Each blade enters the water with a satisfying splash before disappearing beneath the surface. Tiny droplets scatter through the air, sparkling briefly in the pale sunlight. Some land on your sleeves, others find your face. You barely notice anymore. The rhythm demands your attention instead. Splash, pull, breathe, recover. The pattern repeats so consistently that time begins losing its meaning. Minutes blend into one another, perhaps hours. The only reliable measure becomes the steady ache building inside your muscles. It is not painful, only honest. Beside you, the older sailor rows with remarkable efficiency. His movements appear smaller than yours, yet somehow his oar pushes just as much water. Nothing is wasted. Every motion counts. You quietly imitate his technique. Rather than pulling wildly with your arms, you allow your legs and back to share the effort. Almost immediately, rowing feels smoother, less exhausting. Experience once again triumphs over enthusiasm. The wind freshens slightly, filling the sail overhead, instead of stopping completely. The captain simply reduces the rowing pace. Both sail and oars now share the work. The ship seems grateful. A flock of seabirds suddenly circles above the water several hundred yards away. Their cries drift across the waves before fading into the breeze. One sailor points quietly. Fish! Only that single word. The birds have found feeding grounds beneath the surface. The captain watches them carefully before making a subtle adjustment to the ship's course. Nature continues offering clues. The wise continue listening. Scholars still debate exactly how Viking crews balanced rowing with sailing during long expeditions. Wind conditions, cargo weight, crew size, and weather likely influenced daily decisions more than any fixed rule. Flexibility kept ships moving. Certainty rarely existed. The sun climbs higher. Although it provides little real warmth, its light lifts everyone's mood. Faces brighten slightly, shoulders loosen. Even the sea appears less severe beneath the gentle glow. You feel sweat gathering beneath your wool tunic. That realization surprises you. Only yesterday the cold seemed impossible to escape. Now the work itself creates enough heat that you briefly consider loosening your cloak. The older sailor notices immediately. He gently shakes his head. Not yet. You understand why moments later. The rowing slows as the wind strengthens, almost instantly. Cool air begins removing the heat your body worked so hard to create. Had you removed a layer, the chill would have arrived much faster. Patience protects warmth, not impulse. A curious story passes quietly down the rowing benches. One sailor claims his grandfather could judge the distance travelled simply by the feeling inside his shoulders after a day's rowing. Several men laugh softly. Another nods thoughtfully. Perhaps the tale contains more truth than exaggeration. Bodies remember effort remarkably well. The smell of salt grows stronger as waves begin breaking more frequently against the bow. Fine mist drifts across the deck, settling gently upon your hands. Your grip never loosens. The polished wood feels almost alive beneath your fingers. Smooth, solid, reliable. You begin appreciating the craftsmanship behind every oar. Each one balances strength with flexibility. Too heavy, and the crew would tire quickly. Too light, and it might snap beneath the strain. Even simple tools demand careful design. Nothing aboard exists by accident. Hours pass. The captain finally signals for a brief rest. The oars lift together. Silence returns almost immediately. Your arms feel wonderfully heavy. Your breathing gradually slows while your heartbeat settles into a calmer rhythm. The warmth remains. For now, you rub your palms together, not because they are cold, because they tingle pleasantly after gripping the oar for so long. Nearby, another sailor quietly flexes stiff fingers before taking a careful drink of water. No one wastes the pause. Recovery matters. Soon enough the command comes again. The oars slip back into the sea with familiar confidence. This time the movement feels easier, not because the work has changed, because your body has begun accepting its new rhythm. You no longer fight the motion of the ship. You move with it. The longship rises gently over another rolling swell before settling back into the water with graceful certainty. Every synchronized stroke carries the vessel a little farther across the cold northern sea. No fire burns aboard, no glowing embers warm frozen hands. Instead, dozens of determined people create their own quiet furnace through steady effort, shared discipline, and countless perfectly timed strokes. The sea takes every ounce of that energy. The crew simply gives another stroke, and then another. Your shoulders still carry the pleasant ache from hours at the oars when the captain finally signals for a slower pace. The longship continues forward beneath a steady breeze, its sail drawing enough wind that the crew can briefly rest their arms. Nobody truly relaxes. The sea rarely allows that luxury. Instead, the energy aboard the ship changes. Hands leave the oars and move toward ropes, cargo, and simple repairs. Eyes drift toward the horizon. Watching becomes work, important work. You stand carefully, stretching your back while keeping one hand against the gunwale. The deck gently rises beneath your boots before settling again. After several days aboard, your body instinctively adjusts to each movement. You hardly notice, until you remember how awkward it once felt. The air smells different today. The familiar scent of salt remains, but another aroma rides the breeze. It is faintly earthy, carrying hints of wet stone and seaweed. You breathe deeply. Land, somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen coastlines are sending their scent across the water. You cannot see them. The captain smiles anyway. Experienced Viking sailors learned that the sea constantly revealed information to anyone patient enough to observe it. Before compasses became common in northern Europe, navigators depended upon hundreds of small clues instead of one magical solution. The ocean spoke softly. The wise listened carefully. A young sailor points toward a cluster of birds gliding low across the waves. Unlike the gulls that often follow ships, these birds fly with surprising determination. They are travelling somewhere, not wandering. The captain quietly watches their direction before making another subtle adjustment to the ship's course. You raise an eyebrow. He notices. There is always a reason, he says gently. No further explanation follows. You soon realize that every experienced sailor aboard understands exactly what he means. Birds returning toward nesting grounds often hint at nearby land. Different species travel different distances from shore. Recognizing those habits transforms ordinary wildlife into reliable companions. Nature becomes a map, one feather at a time. Historians generally agree that Viking navigators combined many forms of environmental knowledge rather than relying upon a single technique. They observed birds, waves, currents, clouds, seasonal winds, coastal landmarks, and the position of the sun throughout the day. Navigation remained alive, not mechanical. The sky itself begins offering new information. Thin, high clouds stretch across the western horizon like pale brushstrokes painted over blue canvas. They seem harmless enough. The older sailor studies them for several moments. Then he quietly tightens a loose rope. Others begin checking equipment without being asked. You glance upward again. The clouds still appear beautiful. Why the sudden caution? The answer arrives gradually. The breeze freshens, not dramatically, just enough to flutter the edges of every cloak aboard the ship. One sailor quietly murmurs that high clouds sometimes arrive before stronger weather. Another nods in agreement while securing a storage chest more firmly against the deck. Preparation begins early. Long before danger appears, you walk toward the bow, carefully placing each step between coils of rope. The ship slices cleanly through the grey water, leaving long ribbons of white foam drifting behind. The sound never stops. Water whispers endlessly against wood. It becomes almost musical. Far below the surface, darker streaks begin weaving through the sea. At first they resemble shadows from passing clouds. Then you notice something different. The clouds are elsewhere. The water itself is changing. Currents, invisible rivers flowing beneath the ocean. The captain watches them closely before adjusting course only a few degrees. The longship immediately rides more smoothly over the waves. Such a tiny correction, such a noticeable difference. You ask how he noticed. He smiles toward the water rather than answering directly. Watch long enough. Everything tells you. Simple words. Years of knowledge. Scholars continue debating exactly how much Viking navigators understood about large-scale ocean currents compared with practical local experience, while they lacked modern scientific terminology. Repeated voyages undoubtedly taught them where water consistently behaved differently. Names mattered little. Observation mattered greatly. The breeze shifts once more. This time it carries a cooler edge. You pull your hood slightly forward without thinking. The habit has become automatic. Small lessons remain with you. A curious discussion begins near the stern concerning an unusual crystal that some believe helped sailors locate the hidden sun on cloudy days. One crew member insists his grandfather once owned such a stone. Another remains politely skeptical. The conversation stays friendly. No one claims certainty. Modern researchers still discuss whether certain transparent crystals could have helped detect polarized sunlight under overcast skies. Some experiments suggest the idea may have practical value, while others remain cautious about how widely such methods were actually used. History sometimes whispers, instead of shouting. The afternoon grows quieter. Even the waves seem gentler for a while. A seal suddenly appears beside the ship, lifting its round head above the surface before disappearing beneath the water almost immediately. Several sailors smile. One offers a cheerful greeting. You laugh softly. The sea no longer feels entirely empty. The smell of damp rope mingles with fresh pine from a recently repaired oar. Every surface aboard the longship carries its own scent, gradually blending into an aroma that now feels strangely familiar. You realize something unexpected. The ship itself has become home. Not permanent, but real, as the sun begins lowering toward the western horizon. Golden light spreads across the sea. Every small wave catches the sunlight before releasing it again. The water sparkles, like scattered coins. No one seems distracted by the beauty. They continue watching the horizon, the birds, the clouds, and the changing color of the sea with steady concentration. Beauty and usefulness coexist. One never replaces the other. The captain finally nods with quiet satisfaction. The course remains true. The wind remains favorable. The crew settles comfortably into another evening at sea. You glance once more toward the endless horizon. Yesterday it seemed empty. Today it feels full of information. Birds reveal distance. Clouds suggest tomorrow. Currents shape the journey. Even the smell of the wind carries hidden messages. The northern sea has been speaking since the voyage began. Only now are you beginning to understand its language. The wind shifts again during the night, not with a roar, not with dramatic force, just enough to change the sound of the waves brushing against the hull. You wake before sunrise because something feels different, even before your eyes fully open. The ship is moving differently. The motion has become shorter and sharper, causing every loose rope to sway with a new rhythm. You sit upright beneath your wool cloak and immediately notice another change. Everything feels damp. The rowing bench beneath you holds a thin film of moisture. Tiny droplets cling to the gunwale beside your shoulder. Even the wool wrapped around your legs feels slightly heavier than it did before you fell asleep. Nothing is soaked, yet nothing is truly dry. The northern sea has a remarkable talent for finding every surface. You brush your hand across the bench. Cold water gathers against your fingertips before dripping quietly onto the deck. A sailor nearby has already begun shaking out his cloak. He snaps it firmly several times before spreading it across the rail while the morning breeze strengthens. The gesture looks routine. Because it is. You quickly join him. Each sharp movement sends tiny beads of water flying into the air, where they briefly catch the pale morning light before disappearing overboard. Every drop removed matters, perhaps not immediately, but eventually. Historians generally agree that moisture posed one of the greatest long-term challenges during northern voyages. Freezing temperatures alone could often be managed through proper clothing and steady movement. Constant dampness slowly weakened both insulation and morale. Water never sleeps. Neither could the crew. The smell of wet wool fills the air. Yesterday it carried a pleasant earthy scent. Today it seems heavier, richer, almost sweet after absorbing salt water and mist throughout the night. You inhale deeply. The smell now belongs to the voyage itself. Nearby, one sailor quietly inspects his leather shoes. He turns them upside down before gently tapping the soles against the deck. Only a few drops fall out. He smiles anyway. Better outside than inside. That simple phrase earns several quiet nods from the others. No one argues. Everyone understands. Wet feet may begin with discomfort, but they rarely end there. Long before anyone understood bacteria or circulation in scientific terms, experienced sailors recognized that neglected feet quickly created problems. Blisters formed, skin softened, walking became painful. Pain slowed work. The chain continued. You remove one boot briefly. Your wool sock remains slightly damp but pleasantly warm from your own body heat. You squeeze it gently before pulling the boot back on without delay. The older sailor notices. Too long. He says only those 2 words. You immediately understand. Exposing warm feet to cold air accomplishes little. Dry them when possible. Cover them quickly. The lesson lasts seconds. Its value lasts much longer. The sun rises behind a curtain of thin clouds, providing more light than warmth. Soft silver reflections dance across the sea while a faint breeze continues sweeping moisture from every available surface. The crew quietly helps the process. Cloaks hang briefly over ropes. Blankets stretch across the rail. Small leather pouches sit open for fresh air. Nothing remains exposed longer than necessary. The weather may change at any moment. Scholars continue discussing how Viking crews balance the need to dry clothing with the practical limitations of space aboard relatively narrow ships. Storage remained limited, forcing sailors to improvise whenever conditions briefly improved. Opportunity became precious. Even sunshine. A sailor unwraps a spare wool tunic from inside an oiled leather bundle. The fabric emerges surprisingly dry despite days at sea. You raise your eyebrows. The leather has protected it remarkably well. He carefully exchanges garments before hanging the damp one where sunlight and breeze can reach both sides. Preparation wins again. Long before the voyage began, a curious story begins circulating while everyone works. One sailor claims his grandfather could predict rain simply by smelling the wool inside his cloak. Another laughs softly. A third admits his own grandmother believed exactly the same thing. Whether the tale contains truth or family imagination hardly matters. Everyone smiles. Historians still argue whether traditional weather observations passed through Viking communities represented reliable, practical knowledge, or simply memorable folklore mixed with generations of experience. The answer probably lies somewhere between. As often happens, the ship continues northward. Gentle waves tap steadily against the hull. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. The sound feels almost comforting now. You realize something unexpected. Several days ago you noticed every splash. Now they blend into the background like breathing. Your senses are adapting. The smell of salt no longer dominates everything. Instead, you begin recognizing smaller details hidden beneath it. Fresh-cut pine from a repaired spar. Tar warmed slightly by weak sunlight. Leather drying in the breeze. Even the faint aroma of butter stored inside tightly sealed containers. The voyage teaches your nose. As much as your eyes, a sudden gust sweeps across the deck. Several cloaks flutter wildly before sailors calmly secure them again. Nobody chases loose fabric in panic. Everyone moves with deliberate precision. Experience removes unnecessary excitement. You help gather a blanket before it slips into the sea. Its rough wool scratches pleasantly against your hands. The fibers still feel slightly cool, yet noticeably drier than earlier that morning. Progress arrives quietly. One breeze at a time, the captain walks slowly around the vessel, touching ropes, inspecting knots, checking lashings with practiced fingers. He rarely speaks. His hands do most of the conversation. Nothing escapes his attention. Not a frayed cord, not a loose barrel, not a damp sail corner. Everything receives quiet care before becoming a problem. You begin realizing that survival aboard a Viking ship depended far less upon heroic moments than endless ordinary maintenance. Tiny corrections, repeated daily. The afternoon passes beneath a sky that never fully clears. The sun appears only occasionally before slipping behind drifting clouds once more. Still, the brief light proves enough. Most of the damp clothing has noticeably improved. Not perfectly dry. Good enough. Out here, perfection remains a luxury. Good enough often means survival. You pull your cloak around your shoulders once more. It feels lighter, warmer, more comfortable than it did at sunrise. No hidden fire accomplished that. Only patience, fresh air, careful habits. The sea still surrounds you with endless cold water, yet every thoughtful decision quietly steals a little victory from that cold, allowing the voyage to continue another peaceful day across the northern ocean. The sea greets you with another cool morning. Low clouds drift quietly overhead while the longship slips across gentle swells that seem almost sleepy after yesterday's restless waters. A pale breeze brushes your face, carrying the familiar scent of salt, wet wood, and distant seaweed. The air feels calm, almost welcoming. You have now spent enough days aboard the vessel that its sounds no longer surprise you. Every creak of timber, every flutter of sailcloth, every soft knock of rope against the mast has become part of a quiet daily rhythm. The ship breathes. You breathe with it. After breakfast, the captain studies the sky before giving a few simple instructions. The wind remains steady, yet cooler than before. Clouds promise little sunshine for the rest of the day. Several sailors immediately begin preparing simple wind shelters. Not walls, not cabins, only clever barriers. At first, the arrangement looks unimpressive. A folded section of sailcloth is stretched between upright oars. Spare cloaks are tied across short ropes. Wooden chests are shifted slightly to block the strongest gusts. Nothing appears permanent. Everything proves useful. You step behind one of the makeshift screens. The difference surprises you immediately. The temperature has barely changed, yet the biting wind almost disappears. Without the constant flow of cold air across your clothing, your body keeps far more of its own warmth. The lesson feels almost magical, yet it is simple physics. Historians generally agree that Viking longships lacked enclosed living cabins during ordinary voyages. Instead, crews relied upon practical methods to reduce exposure, using sails, shields, cargo, and available equipment to block the wind whenever conditions allowed. The ship stayed open. The sailors adapted. You help secure another section of heavy wool sailcloth along the starboard side. The fabric feels coarse beneath your fingers, carrying the faint smell of lanolin mixed with salt. A sailor tightens the knots carefully. Not too tight, not too loose. The cloth must move slightly with the wind rather than tearing under sudden strain. Even shelter must remain flexible. The breeze strengthens for a few minutes before settling again. You remain behind the temporary barrier, noticing something remarkable. Your ears no longer ache. Your cheeks feel warmer. The difference comes not from adding heat, but from preventing its escape. The sea teaches another quiet lesson. Protect what you already have. One younger crew member sits with his back against a storage chest, carefully repairing a leather strap while sheltered from the wind. Another quietly sharpens a small utility knife using a smooth stone. The protected space becomes a workshop, not just a refuge. The smell inside the sheltered corner changes noticeably. Without constant wind carrying everything away, you catch richer scents of leather, pine resin, damp wool, and smoked fish resting inside nearby bundles. The space feels almost intimate. A tiny room beneath the open sky. You glance upward. There is no roof, only drifting clouds. Yet your mind begins accepting this small protected corner as a place of comfort. Shelter need not be elaborate, only effective. A sudden gust rattles the sailcloth above your head. It snaps loudly before settling once more. The noise startles you. Nobody else reacts. The older sailor beside you smiles gently. The wind always complains. His voice remains calm. You smile back. Somehow the joke feels perfectly suited to life aboard the ship. Scholars continue discussing whether Viking crews occasionally carried lightweight tent-like covering specifically intended for resting on deck during longer expeditions. Archaeological evidence remains limited, though practical improvisation almost certainly played a major role whenever weather allowed. Certainty remains elusive. Ingenuity does not. The afternoon grows cooler. Clouds thicken until the sun becomes little more than a pale white circle shining through layers of grey. Still, inside the sheltered space, conditions remain noticeably more comfortable. You understand something important. Warmth is relative. Compared with standing fully exposed, this modest barrier feels almost luxurious. Outside, another sailor carefully adjusts the angle of the sail to reduce unnecessary strain as the breeze shifts. Every change aboard the vessel happens quietly. No dramatic commands, only small corrections. You begin appreciating how smoothly experienced crews communicate. A glance often replaces spoken instructions. A raised hand accomplishes what shouting never could. Everyone watches. Everyone responds. A curious tale begins circulating while the crew enjoys a brief pause from rowing. One sailor claims an ancestor once stretched walrus hides between upright spears during an especially bitter voyage, creating a surprisingly warm resting place despite freezing winds. Another raises an amused eyebrow. No one knows whether the story happened exactly that way. Still, everyone agrees on one point. People have always invented clever ways to hide from the wind. Historians still argue how much of the legendary resourcefulness described in later sagas reflects genuine historical practice, and how much became embellished through generations of storytelling. Memory changes, practical wisdom often survives. The sea remains calm enough that conversation continues comfortably. You lean against a storage chest, running one hand across the weathered wood. It feels smooth, solid, dependable. The chest itself serves many purposes. It protects supplies, provides seating, blocks the wind, supports temporary shelters. Every object aboard the ship earns its place through usefulness rather than decoration. Space remains precious. Nothing travels without reason. As evening approaches, the temporary windbreaks become even more valuable. The temperature drops steadily while a fresh northern breeze begins flowing across the deck once again. You instinctively move behind the sailcloth barrier. Without thinking, the habit has already formed. You notice others doing exactly the same. Experience quietly reshapes behavior. No one discusses it. No one needs to. The shelter cannot stop the cold entirely. It cannot dry soaked clothing. It cannot replace the warmth of a hearth. Yet by stealing the strength from the wind, it allows tired bodies to conserve precious energy for another day. Sometimes survival depends upon grand decisions. Far more often, it depends upon simple pieces of cloth tied carefully between two sturdy poles. The longship continues forward through the gathering twilight, behind its modest wind shelters. The crew settles into another peaceful evening, carrying their warmth with them instead of chasing flames that could never safely accompany them across the endless northern sea. Another dawn arrives wrapped in pale grey light. The sea seems unusually quiet this morning. Long, gentle swells lift the ship with slow, steady confidence while the wind hums softly through the rigging above your head. Nothing feels hurried, neither does the crew. You have begun noticing something that escaped your attention during the first days of the voyage. The greatest strength aboard this longship is not the timber, the sail, or even the remarkable skill of the captain. It is the people. Every successful voyage depends upon dozens of individuals moving almost as though they share one heartbeat. No one says this aloud. Everyone lives it. The smell of breakfast still lingers faintly across the deck as the rowing benches fill once more. Hands settle onto polished oars. Feet brace against worn beams polished smooth by countless earlier expeditions. The captain raises his arm. The first stroke begins. Pull, recover. Pull, recover. Soon the rhythm echoes through the entire vessel. Oars enter the sea together with satisfying precision before lifting clear in perfect sequence. The longship barely seems to resist. It simply moves. Historians generally agree that teamwork lay at the very centre of Viking seafaring. Even the finest ship could accomplish little without disciplined coordination among its crew. Every sailor depended upon everyone else. Strength became shared, never individual. You quickly discover that rowing beside experienced sailors feels surprisingly reassuring. Their movements remain calm and predictable. They neither rush nor hesitate. You begin matching their pace almost without thinking. Your breathing synchronizes. Your shoulders move together. The oars rise and fall like the wings of a great seabird. The sound becomes hypnotic. Splash, wood, breath. Splash, wood, breath. Time slowly disappears inside the rhythm. A younger sailor beside you begins rowing slightly too quickly. His eagerness creates tiny disruptions along the line of oars. No one scolds him. The older sailor simply slows his own stroke by the smallest amount. The younger man notices immediately. Within moments, harmony returns. Correction arrives quietly, without embarrassment. That simple exchange teaches more than any long speech. The crew values cooperation over pride. Every unnecessary competition wastes precious energy. The sea rewards unity, not ego. The morning breeze freshens just enough to carry voices farther across the water. Someone near the stern begins humming a familiar melody. Soon another joins, then another. Before long, half the rowing benches move gently in time with the quiet tune. No one performs. No one seeks attention. The song exists only to steady the rhythm. Historians believe work songs likely helped many maritime communities maintain coordinated effort during repetitive labour, although little direct evidence survives describing Viking rowing songs in detail. Similar traditions appear across numerous seafaring cultures. Music becomes another tool. Simple, effective. The melody drifts gently across the sea before fading into the wind. Even after the voices stop, the rowing rhythm continues almost unchanged. Your body remembers. Your ears no longer need guidance. The smell of damp pine rises from the oars whenever spray lands upon them. Mixed with salt and tar, the scent has become deeply familiar. You almost look forward to it. Strange how quickly people adapt. The captain walks slowly between the rowing benches while the ship continues forward. He offers no dramatic speeches, only small observations. A loose grip here, a crooked foot there, a quiet nod after a particularly smooth sequence of strokes. Leadership aboard the ship appears remarkably understated. Confidence speaks softly. The sea listens anyway. During a short rest, you notice two sailors exchanging places. One has rowed for hours. The other now takes his position. The transition happens so naturally that the longship barely loses momentum. Everyone understands every role. Flexibility keeps exhaustion away. The crew does not divide work according to pride. Whoever possesses enough strength performs the task needed at that moment. Tomorrow the roles may change again. No one complains. A curious story spreads during the midday meal. One sailor claims his grandfather once crossed an entire fjord with a crew so perfectly synchronized that passing fishermen believed only half the number of rowers were aboard, because they moved with such extraordinary precision. Several sailors laugh warmly. Another quietly nods. Whether the tale is exaggerated hardly matters. Its message remains clear. True teamwork becomes almost invisible. Scholars still argue how formal leadership structures differed among Viking expeditions. Some voyages probably relied upon highly respected captains exercising clear authority, while others may have operated through stronger community traditions and shared experience. The evidence leaves room for interpretation. Human nature always does. Clouds briefly separate overhead. Soft sunlight spills across the deck, warming your face just enough to make you smile. The older sailor notices, and soak it in. He closes his eyes for a heartbeat before returning to his work. Every gift from nature deserves appreciation, especially small ones. The afternoon brings stronger winds. Rowing pauses while the sail carries much of the burden, rather than sitting idle. The crew immediately begins other tasks. One sailor repairs a torn rope. Another reorganizes supplies. Two more inspect the lashings securing cargo. No one waits for instructions. Everyone finds useful work. Idleness appears almost foreign aboard the longship, not because constant labour is demanded, because shared responsibility feels natural. You help tighten several leather straps around a water barrel. The thick leather feels cool beneath your fingers, slightly rough after days exposed to salt air. The knot holds firmly, a satisfying result. Nearby, another sailor quietly thanks you. Only 2 words, yet they linger pleasantly. Small kindnesses matter, perhaps even more than large gestures. The sea remains calm through the late afternoon. Gentle waves roll beneath the hull while gulls appear briefly in the distance before disappearing once again. You notice how rarely anyone aboard argues. Differences surely exist, fatigue certainly exists, yet survival leaves little room for unnecessary conflict. The cold encourages cooperation, not division. As evening approaches, everyone prepares the ship for another night with familiar efficiency. Cloaks are adjusted, supplies checked, ropes secured. Each person completes several tasks without needing reminders. The routine has become part of them, just as the sea has. Looking round the deck, you realise something profound. A Viking longship was never merely a collection of skilled individuals sharing the same vessel. It became a single living community. Every steady hand strengthened another. Every quiet lesson passed forward. Every shared effort transformed cold water, endless wind, and uncertain horizons into another ordinary day of survival upon the northern sea. Several days pass before you notice the change. Not in the ship, not in the crew, in the sea itself. The familiar coastal waters have slowly given way to something larger, quieter, and far more mysterious. The horizon now forms an almost perfect circle around the longship. Land has vanished completely. There is only water and sky. The realization settles gently inside you. For the first time since leaving the fjord, you truly understand how small the vessel appears against the immense northern ocean. The feeling is not frightening, only humbling. A cool breeze brushes across your face, carrying nothing except salt and the faint mineral scent of open water. Gone are the earthy smells drifting from hidden coastlines. No forests announce themselves on the wind. The ocean smells empty, yet strangely alive. The waves have changed as well. Near shore they rose and fell with irregular patterns shaped by islands, cliffs, and underwater rocks. Out here, they roll in long, graceful swells that seem to begin somewhere beyond imagination. Up, forward, down, again. The rhythm feels slower, almost thoughtful. Historians generally agree that Viking sailors became remarkably skilled at crossing open stretches of the North Atlantic, eventually reaching places such as Iceland, Greenland, and even the shores of North America centuries before many other Europeans. These journeys demanded patience. More than bravery, you stand beside the mast, resting one hand against the smooth timber. The wood feels cool beneath your palm, gently vibrating with every movement of the sail overhead. The ship seems relaxed, as though it belongs here. Perhaps it does. The longship was never designed merely for sheltered rivers or narrow fjords. Its flexible hull allowed it to ride with the sea instead of fighting every wave. That quiet flexibility becomes obvious now. The vessel bends slightly, never complains. A sailor notices you watching the movement. He smiles. The sea wins every argument. Simple wisdom, impossible to forget. Instead of resisting the slow rise and fall, the ship follows it naturally. Every swell lifts the bow before setting it down with surprising gentleness. The motion becomes comforting, like steady breathing. Clouds drift lazily across a pale northern sky. Their reflections stretch across the water until the horizon nearly disappears. Sea and sky become neighbours, almost identical. You suddenly understand why experienced navigators spent so much time studying subtle differences in light, wind, and wave direction. Without attention, orientation quickly fades. Everything begins looking the same. A flock of distant seabirds appears briefly before circling away toward the west. The captain watches them, only for a moment. Then he returns his attention to the sail. Not every bird matters equally. Experience teaches which signs deserve action. The smell of dried fish reaches you from an open food bundle nearby. Someone quietly slices hard cheese while another sailor checks the water barrels. Life continues. Even in endless water, you realize that routines become even more important when familiar landmarks disappear. Meals arrive at regular times. Equipment receives constant inspection. Clothing is adjusted before problems begin. Predictability creates calm. The ocean provides enough uncertainty already. Scholars continue debating how frequently Viking crews ventured far beyond visible coastlines during different periods. Some researchers believe many voyages remained largely coastal whenever possible, while others argue open water crossings became increasingly common as navigation skills improved. The evidence points both ways. Human ambition often does. During the afternoon, the breeze weakens until the sail hangs with gentle folds instead of firm curves. The captain studies the sea quietly. Then comes the familiar command. The oars return. You settle onto the rowing bench once more. The polished handle fits naturally into your hands now. No awkwardness remains, only habit. The crew rows steadily through the calm water. Without strong wind, every mile depends upon patient effort. The silence surrounding the ship feels enormous. Even the splash of each oar seems unusually loud. Splash, lift, recover, splash. The sounds echo across the empty sea before disappearing into the distance. A curious conversation begins during a short pause. One sailor points toward the deep blue water and quietly wonders how far it reaches beneath the ship. Another claims a mountain could stand upside down beneath them without touching the surface. Several laugh softly. No one truly knows. The comparison sounds impossible, yet it captures the mystery perfectly. Historians still argue how Viking sailors understood the vastness of the open ocean beyond practical observation. While they clearly recognized immense distances, many traditional stories blended real geography with legendary places hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Knowledge and imagination often sail together, neither entirely replace the other. As evening approaches, the sunlight changes from pale silver to warm gold. Long reflections stretch across the calm water until the entire sea appears covered with liquid bronze. The sight is breathtaking. Quietly so. No one speaks for several minutes. Words seem unnecessary. You hear only the gentle flutter of the sail, the occasional creak of timber, and the soft breathing of tired sailors resting after another day of steady work. The atmosphere feels almost sacred, not because of ceremony, because of stillness. You realize how different this silence feels from silence on land. Forests rustle, fields sing with insects, villages carry distant voices. Out here, the silence belongs almost entirely to water. It surrounds you gently. The older sailor sits beside you without saying anything for a long time. Finally he gestures toward the horizon. It teaches patience. Nothing more. He does not explain. He does not need to. The lesson becomes obvious simply by watching the endless meeting place between sea and sky. Nothing hurries there. Nothing forces tomorrow to arrive sooner. The longship continues gliding across the open northern ocean with quiet determination. Every stroke of the oars, every careful adjustment of the sail, and every shared routine carries the crew farther from familiar shores. Yet strangely, you no longer feel lost. The sea has become familiar enough that its vastness no longer feels empty. It feels like another home, a colder one, a quieter one, but a home nonetheless, where preparation, patience, and trust continue guiding every mile beneath the endless northern sky. The sea changes its mood long before anyone says a word. You notice it first in the wind. Yesterday it carried a steady, reassuring rhythm across the sail. Today it arrives in uneven breaths, sometimes falling completely silent before returning with surprising force. The longship seems to hesitate, almost as if it is listening. A faint metallic scent fills the air. It mixes with salt, damp wool, and tar until the atmosphere feels heavier than before. The older sailor beside you slowly lifts his face toward the sky. He says nothing. He does not need to. The clouds have begun gathering. not in dramatic black towers. Instead, layer upon layer of grey slowly spreads across the northern sky, swallowing the patches of blue that greeted you at sunrise. Light begins fading, although it is still morning. The captain quietly walks the length of the deck. His movements remain unhurried. That calm spreads through the crew almost immediately. No one rushes, no one whispers nervous questions. Preparation begins exactly as it always has. Historians generally agree that experienced Viking sailors rarely viewed storms as unexpected disasters. More often, they recognized subtle warning signs well before the worst weather arrived, allowing valuable time to secure the ship and adjust their plans. The sea usually warned first. Wise crews paid attention. You help tighten the ropes holding the cargo chests against the hull. The coarse fibers scrape gently across your palms as you pull each knot firm. Another sailor checks every water barrel. Another folds spare sailcloth. A fourth quietly gathers loose tools into leather bags. Nothing remains unattended. Everything receives a proper place. The breeze freshens again. This time the change feels unmistakable. The sail snaps sharply overhead before settling into a deep, steady curve. The mast responds with a low wooden groan that echoes through the entire vessel. You feel it beneath your feet. The ship is speaking. A fine mist begins drifting across the sea. Not rain, not yet, only tiny droplets carried by strengthening wind. They settle upon your face so lightly that you almost mistake them for cold air. Your cheeks grow damp. The wool collar around your neck catches most of the moisture before it reaches your skin. Another quiet victory. One more reason those heavy garments matter. The captain orders a small adjustment to the sail. Several sailors move together with practiced confidence, lowering part of the canvas rather than allowing the strengthening wind to place unnecessary strain upon the rigging. Less sail. More control. Speed becomes less important than safety. You begin understanding another truth about these northern voyages. The goal was never to defeat nature, only to travel alongside it. A larger wave lifts the bow. Then another follows before the first has completely passed. The longship rises gracefully before settling back into the water with surprising softness. Its flexible hull bends slightly, never resisting completely. The older sailor notices your expression. He pats the gunwale affectionately. It knows. Only 2 words. Yet you understand exactly what he means. The ship survives because it yields, not because it refuses. Scholars continue discussing precisely how Viking shipbuilders achieved such remarkable flexibility, using overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets and carefully selected timber. The surviving vessels demonstrate extraordinary craftsmanship, though some construction details remain subjects of ongoing research. Their knowledge came from generations, not instruction books. The smell of wet rope grows stronger. Every knot absorbs moisture while remaining firm beneath careful hands. Nearby, a sailor rubs additional animal fat across a leather strap to help preserve its flexibility despite the damp conditions. Maintenance never pauses, especially before difficult weather. A curious tale quietly circulates while everyone works. One sailor claims his grandfather could tell the strength of an approaching storm simply by listening to the tone of the rigging at night. Another smiles politely. Perhaps he could. Perhaps memory improved with age. Either way, several crew members instinctively glance upward toward the humming ropes. The sound has certainly changed. Historians still argue whether later saga stories exaggerated the almost supernatural weather instincts of famous captains, or whether decades of experience genuinely allowed seasoned sailors to recognize remarkably subtle environmental changes. Observation often appears magical, only because it is so practiced. By midday, the first real rain arrives. It begins gently. Small drops strike the deck with soft tapping sounds before disappearing into the weathered timber. Tap, tap, tap. Soon hundreds of tiny impacts blend into one steady whisper. No one complains. Rain belongs here. You pull your hood farther forward, leaving only a narrow opening through which to watch the sea. Water trickles harmlessly down the outside of your cloak instead of soaking the layers beneath. The wool grows heavier. yet it continues protecting you. The wind increases once more. Loose strands of hair whip across your forehead while the bow sends white spray curling into the air. The sea darkens noticeably. Gone is yesterday's bronze reflection. Now the water resembles polished slate beneath the grey sky. Still, no panic appears aboard. Voices remain calm. Movements remain deliberate. Each sailor concentrates upon one responsibility before quietly moving to the next. Confidence spreads through routine, not excitement. The rain eventually eases, leaving only scattered droplets falling from the edges of the sail. A faint brightness appears behind the clouds, suggesting the sun still waits somewhere above the thick overcast. You had almost forgotten it. The captain surveys the horizon one more time. His face remains thoughtful, not worried. The crew gradually returns to ordinary tasks, though everyone keeps a closer eye upon the changing weather than before. You realize the greatest challenge was never fear. It was remaining disciplined while uncertainty surrounded you. Storms did not suddenly create skilled sailors. They revealed whether preparation had been sufficient. As evening approaches, the sea continues rolling beneath the longship with quiet determination. The sky remains grey, the air remains cold, and the wind still carries a sharp edge. Yet the vessel moves steadily onward. No fire burns against the darkness. No glowing beacon offers reassurance. Instead, careful hands, practiced judgment, and calm minds guide the ship through another demanding day, proving once again that surviving the Northern Ocean depended far more upon quiet readiness than dramatic courage. By the following morning, the sea has finally loosened its grip. The wind still blows from the north, but its sharp edges have softened. Low clouds drift apart just enough for pale sunlight to spread across the rolling water. The crew notices immediately, not with cheers, with quieter smiles. Ahead, a dark line slowly rises from the horizon. At first you mistake it for another bank of clouds. Then the shape becomes clearer. Jagged cliffs emerge above the water, followed by patches of green grass clinging stubbornly to rocky slopes. Land, at last. The sight changes everyone. Shoulders seem lighter. Conversations become slightly livelier. Even the steady splash of the oars carries a little more energy. After days surrounded by nothing but water, solid ground feels almost unbelievable. The smell reaches you long before the shore. Fresh earth, wet moss, seaweed drying on rocks, a faint scent of pine drifting down from higher ground. It is richer than anything carried by the open ocean. You breathe deeply. Your lungs seem grateful. The longship glides toward a sheltered cove where steep cliffs block much of the northern wind. The water immediately becomes calmer, reflecting the rocky shoreline like polished glass. The difference feels remarkable. Only a few hundred yards separate the open sea from this peaceful refuge. Nature creates its own harbours. The captain studies the shoreline carefully before choosing a gentle stretch of gravel between larger rocks. Several sailors prepare the mooring lines while others lift the oars clear of the water. No movement is hurried. Landing safely deserves patience. The hull slides softly onto the beach with a muffled scraping sound. Wood meets stone. The voyage pauses. You step carefully into the shallow water, feeling cold seawater press against your boots before climbing onto the rocky shore. The ground feels strangely still. Your legs continue expecting the familiar movement of the ship. For several moments, the earth almost seems to sway beneath you. Another sailor laughs quietly. It happens every time. You are relieved to discover you are not alone. Historians generally agree that Viking crews frequently stopped whenever suitable landing places became available, particularly during longer voyages. These pauses allowed sailors to rest, inspect their ships, gather fresh water when possible, and prepare for the next stage of travel. A good landing place offered more than comfort. It offered opportunity. You stretch your arms toward the pale sky. Every muscle responds. Days of rowing have left pleasant stiffness across your shoulders and back. Standing fully upright upon firm ground feels wonderfully unfamiliar. The breeze carries birdsong from somewhere inland. After so many days listening only to wind and waves, the sound almost surprises you. It feels lively, Hopeful, several crew members immediately begin inspecting the hull. They kneel beside the overlapping planks, running experienced hands across every seam. One sailor gently taps the timber with the handle of a knife, listening. The sound satisfies him. He nods quietly. The ship remains healthy. Another group carries empty water containers toward a small stream flowing down between moss-covered stones. The water sparkles beneath the weak northern sunlight. You kneel beside it. The cold is astonishing. Far colder than expected, yet the taste feels wonderfully fresh after days of carefully rationed barrel water. Nearby, another sailor washes his face before laughing softly at the icy shock. Some pleasures require bravery. The smell of damp grass replaces the constant scent of salt for the first time since leaving the fjord. Tiny wildflowers grow between cracks in the rocks, adding faint sweetness to the cool air. The landscape feels peaceful, almost untouched. You help spread several wool cloaks across sunlit stones where the breeze can dry them more thoroughly than aboard the ship. Nearby, blankets, ropes, and spare clothing receive the same treatment. The shoreline becomes a temporary workshop. Everything breathes. The older sailor removes his boots and carefully checks his feet once again. He rubs them dry with a coarse wool cloth before putting on a fresh pair of socks from a leather bundle. No shortcuts, even ashore. You quietly follow his example. The relief feels immediate. Scholars continue debating how long Viking crews typically remained ashore during routine stops. Some landings probably lasted only a few hours, while others extended overnight depending upon weather, repairs, or local conditions. Every voyage wrote its own schedule. The sea always had the final vote. A curious story begins while several sailors gather driftwood scattered along the beach. One man insists that certain lonely coves belong to invisible guardians who disliked loud voices and unnecessary boasting. Another grins. Then we should be welcome. Soft laughter follows. No one raises their voice. Whether the tale reflects ancient belief or simple entertainment remains impossible to know. Historians still argue how strongly everyday seafaring traditions blended practical caution with older spiritual customs tied to particular landscapes and coastlines. The two often lived comfortably together. The afternoon passes peacefully. One sailor repairs a cracked oar handle. Another resews a loose leather strap. Several inspect the sail, searching for tiny tears before they become larger problems. The work never truly ends. It simply changes location. You sit briefly upon a warm rock overlooking the sheltered bay. The sun has finally broken through the clouds. Its gentle warmth reaches your face without the constant interruption of cold wind. You close your eyes, only for a moment. The sounds surrounding you feel wonderfully different from those aboard the ship. Small waves lap gently against the shore. Seabirds call from nearby cliffs. Water trickles steadily through the stream. Even silence seems softer here. As evening approaches, supplies return aboard the longship. Fresh water fills the barrels. Dry clothing replaces damp garments. Every rope, plank, and tool has received careful attention. The captain walks once around the vessel before giving a quiet nod. The ship is ready. So is the crew. You glance back toward the little cove as the tide begins lifting the hull once more. The peaceful shoreline slowly slips behind. It offered no roaring celebration. No grand reward, only clean water, dry clothing, steady ground, and a few precious hours of recovery. Sometimes that was all a Viking crew needed before facing the cold northern sea once again. The sheltered cove disappears behind the stern as the tide gently carries the longship back into open water. Fresh water now fills the barrels. Dry cloaks rest across tired shoulders. The crew moves with renewed confidence after their brief time ashore. The sea welcomes you back, quietly. The morning breeze is crisp enough to sting your cheeks, yet it no longer feels like an enemy after nearly 2 weeks aboard. Your body has learned the language of cold, wind, and endless motion. The unfamiliar has become familiar. That realization surprises you. You stand near the bow while gentle waves spread outward from the ship in long silver lines. The smell of clean seawater mixes with fresh pine from the repaired oar completed during yesterday's stop. Everything feels renewed. Even the ship seems lighter. A raven suddenly appears from somewhere behind the cliffs. flying steadily above the water before disappearing into the northern sky. Several sailors watch it silently. No one laughs. No one dismisses the moment. For the Vikings, birds were more than simple creatures crossing the sky. Ravens in particular carried deep symbolic meaning. They appeared in stories, poetry, and beliefs that connected people with wisdom, memory, and distant journeys. The bird soon vanishes. Its impression remains. Historians generally agree that Norse society viewed the natural world as deeply meaningful. Mountains, forests, rivers, storms, and animals often carried symbolic importance alongside their practical reality. Everyday life rarely separated nature from belief as sharply as many modern people do. The sea itself possessed character, not merely geography. You notice the older sailor quietly touching a small carved piece of bone hanging beneath his tunic. He does not display it proudly or explain its purpose. It simply rests there, a familiar companion, perhaps a reminder of home, perhaps something more personal. You never ask. Some objects deserve privacy. The breeze freshens slightly, filling the wool sail overhead with a deep, satisfying curve. The familiar creaking of the mast echoes gently through the hull while ropes hum softly in the wind. The sounds no longer seem mechanical. They feel reassuring. The ship is healthy. The sea approves. As the morning continues, one of the younger sailors begins telling a story while repairing a fishing line. His voice remains calm, perfectly matching the rhythm of the waves. He speaks of an explorer who sailed so far north that daylight nearly refused to leave the sky during summer, while winter seemed determined to swallow it forever. The younger crew members listen carefully. The older ones smile. They have clearly heard the tale many times. Yet no one interrupts. Good stories improve with age. You find yourself watching the horizon differently now. Every distant cloud, every shifting light, every seabird crossing the sky seems connected to countless earlier voyages remembered through stories passed from one generation to the next. Knowledge travels, so do legends. Scholars continue debating how much of the famous Norse sagas preserves genuine memories from early voyages, and how much later storytellers reshaped historical events into richer narratives. Most historians believe both memory and imagination contributed to the surviving accounts. Truth often wears beautiful clothing. Stories help it endure. The smell of smoked fish drifts from an opened food pouch while another sailor quietly shares pieces of hard cheese with the crew. The familiar meal has become comforting through repetition. Nobody complains about the simplicity. Predictability brings peace. A curious conversation begins after lunch. One sailor wonders whether the sea remembers every ship that has ever crossed it. Another replies that the sea remembers nothing at all. A third quietly suggests the opposite. Perhaps the sea remembers everything. Soft laughter follows. The discussion ends without agreement. Some questions deserve no final answer. The captain smiles without joining the debate. His attention remains fixed upon the sail and the changing wind. Practical matters always come first. Still, even he glances briefly toward the endless horizon after hearing the conversation. Perhaps he wonders too. Historians still argue how deeply spiritual beliefs influenced everyday decisions aboard Viking ships. Some researchers emphasize practical seamanship above all else, while others believe rituals, symbols, and traditional customs remained closely woven into ordinary life at sea. The surviving evidence leaves room for quiet reflection, much like the ocean itself. The afternoon unfolds peacefully. Gentle sunlight breaks through scattered clouds, warming the deck just enough to dry the last traces of moisture left from yesterday's landing. You run one hand along the gunwale. The wood feels pleasantly warm, only for a moment. Then another cool breeze arrives. Nothing lasts forever. Not warmth, not hardship. The sea constantly reminds you of that truth. A pod of small whales suddenly surfaces several hundred yards from the ship. Their smooth backs rise gracefully before disappearing beneath the waves again. The crew watches silently. No one reaches for weapons. No one shouts. The quiet encounter feels almost respectful. Within moments, the animals vanish. leaving only widening circles upon the water. Nature shares brief company, then continues its own journey. The older sailor quietly remarks that every voyage offers one sight never seen before. You believe him. The northern sea refuses repetition. Even familiar waters create new memories each day. As evening approaches, the sky turns soft shades of amber and lavender. Reflections shimmer across the gentle waves while the sail glows faintly in the lowering sunlight. The atmosphere becomes wonderfully peaceful, almost dreamlike. You think back to the frightened traveller who first stepped aboard the longship beside the frozen fjord. That person seems distant now, not because the sea has grown kinder, because you have grown steadier. Experience quietly changes people. One ordinary day after another, the captain orders a slight adjustment to the course. The sail responds. The ship leans gently. Everyone moves together without hesitation. No words are wasted. No movements are hurried. The longship slips onward beneath the evening sky while old stories, quiet beliefs, practical wisdom, and patient observation continue travelling side by side. Out here, survival belongs not only to strong hands and careful planning, it also belongs to hope, memory, and the comforting stories that help weary sailors face another cold horizon with calm hearts. Morning arrives beneath a sky washed clean by the night's gentle breeze. The clouds have almost disappeared. Soft golden light spreads across the northern sea, turning every small ripple into a shimmering ribbon of silver. For a few peaceful moments, the ocean appears almost perfectly calm. Almost, the longship continues its familiar rise and fall, reminding you that even on quiet days the sea never truly stands still. Neither do the people aboard. By now, the vessel feels less like transportation and more like a living home carried upon the water. Every beam, rope, chest, and bench has become familiar through daily use. You know where everything belongs. Your hands reach for tools without searching. The quiet confidence feels satisfying. The smell of tar greets you as the sun gently warms the outer planks, mixed with pine resin and salt. It creates an aroma that now instantly reminds you of safety. Fresh tar is not particularly pleasant, yet it means protection. Without it, seawater would slowly work its way between the overlapping planks, weakening the hull one voyage after another. Maintenance begins long before damage appears. Historians generally agree that Viking shipbuilders possessed extraordinary woodworking skills, creating vessels that balance strength, flexibility, speed, and relatively lightweight. Their clinker-built construction, using overlapping planks fastened together with iron rivets, proved exceptionally well suited to northern waters. The ship itself became a masterpiece, built for survival. You kneel beside the gunwale, running your fingers gently across one row of rivets. Each iron fastening sits firmly in place despite countless miles of pounding waves. Someone hammered each one by hand years ago, perhaps decades. Their work continues protecting you today. That thought feels strangely comforting. The craftsmanship of strangers still shapes your journey. A sailor nearby notices your curiosity. He smiles and gently taps the hull with his knuckles. Good wood. 2 simple words. Enough said. The deck beneath your feet tells its own story. Areas near the rowing benches have become smooth through years of steady use. Other sections still show the faint texture left by careful carving. Nothing aboard remains untouched. Every surface remembers hands. The breeze carries the familiar scent of drying rope, while several crew members begin inspecting the rigging once again. One sailor slowly runs rough fingers along every length of cord, searching for tiny signs of wear. His eyes rarely blink. Nothing escapes him. The older sailor joins the inspection, pausing occasionally to tighten a knot or replace a worn leather binding. No applause follows. No one comments. This ordinary work quietly prevents extraordinary disasters. Scholars continue discussing exactly how Viking crews divided maintenance responsibilities during long voyages. Some researchers believe specialized knowledge existed among certain sailors, while others argue most experienced crew members probably shared a broad range of practical skills. The evidence suggests flexibility. The sea demanded it. The captain quietly asks you to help examine one of the oars repaired several days earlier. You lift it carefully from its storage place. The wood feels balanced, neither too heavy nor too light. You slide one hand along its smooth shaft until reaching the repaired section. The joint remains firm, invisible beneath careful craftsmanship. A quiet nod from the captain confirms the repair is held perfectly. Good work earns few words. It does not need many. Near the bow, another sailor begins replacing a worn leather strap securing a cargo chest. He works patiently, threading fresh leather through polished wooden loops before pulling everything snug. The smell of new leather briefly fills the air, rich, earthy, almost sweet. The chest hardly moves now. Another small problem disappears before becoming a larger one. A curious discussion begins during the midday meal. One sailor wonders how many different hands helped build the longship before its first voyage. Another guesses 50. Someone else suggests far fewer. The older sailor quietly shrugs. Enough. Everyone laughs softly. The answer feels strangely perfect. Historians still argue about the organization of Viking shipbuilding projects. Large vessels almost certainly required cooperation among skilled craftspeople, local communities, and those supplying timber, iron, wool, tar, and countless other materials. One ship represented many lives, not only one builder. You glance upward at the great wool sail stretching above the mast. Earlier in the voyage you noticed only its size. Now you think differently. Someone sheared the sheep, someone spun the wool, someone wove the cloth, someone stitched every seam by hand. The sail itself carries invisible history. Thread by thread, the afternoon breeze freshens, causing the rigging to hum softly overhead. You pause simply to listen. The sound resembles distant singing carried upon the wind, calm, steady, almost soothing. Nearby, one sailor rubs a little extra tar onto a section of rope where friction has begun wearing away the fibres. Another oils a wooden pulley until it turns more smoothly. Every tool receives attention. Nothing is ignored. You realize the longship survives because thousands of tiny acts of care accumulate over time. One loose knot seems unimportant. One cracked plank appears minor. One neglected strap hardly attracts notice. Together they determine whether everyone returns home. The sea rewards diligence. Every single day, late in the afternoon, sunlight pours across the deck, warming the weathered timber beneath your boots. You sit briefly beside the mast, leaning against the smooth wood while watching gentle waves slide past the hull. The ship feels alive beneath you, not in some magical sense, but through constant motion. It bends, breathes, responds, works alongside its crew rather than simply carrying them. The older sailor settles beside you. For several minutes neither of you speaks. Finally he places one hand upon the deck. Take care of her. She takes care of us. The words remain wonderfully simple, yet they explain everything. The longship was never merely a collection of planks fastened together with iron. It became shelter without walls, a workshop without a roof, a dining room beneath the sky, a bedroom that never stopped moving, a trusted companion crossing one of the coldest seas on earth. As evening slowly approaches, you find yourself quietly brushing seawater from the deck after another passing wave. No one asked you. The habit has become your own. Without noticing, you have become part of the crew and part of the ship itself. Another quiet night slips into morning. The sky opens in soft shades of pale blue while the sea reflects every colour with remarkable clarity. For a little while, the water becomes so smooth that the longship appears to float between two skies instead of one. The world feels endless, almost unreal. You stand near the bow, watching your reflection stretch and bend across the gentle swells. A cool breeze brushes your face, carrying only the familiar scent of salt and fresh air. Nothing seems unusual, at least not yet. Then the mist arrives. It begins as a faint ribbon resting upon the surface several hundred yards ahead. Within minutes it spreads across the sea, drifting silently toward the ship until the distant horizon slowly disappears. The world grows smaller, quieter, every sound changes. The gentle splash of the bow becomes softer. Voices seem strangely muffled. Even the creaking mast appears farther away, although it stands only a few steps above your head. The mist absorbs everything, including distance. Historians generally agree that sea fog posed one of the most challenging conditions for northern sailors. Without clear landmarks, even experienced navigators had to rely upon wind direction, wave patterns, sound, and careful judgment. Patience became essential. Guesswork became dangerous. The captain quietly orders a slower pace. No panic follows. The sail remains steady while the rowers prepare themselves should additional control become necessary. Every movement aboard grows calmer, more deliberate. You suddenly notice another sound. Drip, drip. Tiny beads of moisture collect along the edge of the sail before falling gently onto the deck below. The wool darkens slightly as the mist settles into every fibre. Your cloak grows heavier. Not soaked, simply damp once again. The smell of wet wool returns immediately, mingling with cool tar and weathered pine. After so many days aboard, the familiar scent now feels almost comforting. The voyage has its own fragrance. You would recognize it anywhere. The older sailor walks quietly to the bow and studies the water with remarkable concentration. You follow his gaze. Nothing. Only grey mist. Still, he continues watching. Eventually he smiles. The waves. You look again. At first you see nothing different. Then it becomes clear. Although the horizon has vanished, the direction of the long rolling swells remains unchanged. They continue arriving steadily from the northwest. The sea itself still offers guidance. Even when the sky refuses, scholars continue debating exactly how Viking navigators combined environmental clues during poor visibility. While no single method could guarantee success, experienced sailors almost certainly blended several observations together before making decisions. Knowledge worked best in combination. A curious glow suddenly appears inside the mist. Not bright, not dazzling, merely a pale circle where the hidden sun struggles to shine through layers of cloud and vapour. The light seems suspended, floating. Several younger sailors pause to watch it. The older crew barely glances upward. They have seen this before. Nature enjoys strange beauty. One sailor quietly jokes that the sun has forgotten where it belongs. Soft laughter drifts across the deck before disappearing into the fog. Even mystery leaves room for humour. Historians still argue whether unusual atmospheric effects observed at sea later inspired certain legendary descriptions found in Norse stories. Halos around the sun, shimmering reflections, and distant mirages certainly would have appeared mysterious without modern explanations. Wonder requires no superstition, only open eyes. The mist gradually thickens. Soon the bow itself fades slightly whenever you step toward the stern. The longship seems smaller. The world feels closer. Every sailor instinctively lowers his voice. No one discusses the reason. Perhaps silence simply feels appropriate. You listen carefully. Far away, somewhere beyond the grey curtain, comes the faint cry of seabirds. Only once, then nothing. The captain nods quietly. Life still surrounds them. Even if hidden, a cool drop of water lands upon your nose, then another. The mist has become dense enough to gather into larger droplets hanging from every rope aboard the vessel. You run one finger along a line. Tiny beads collect instantly. The rope almost appears decorated with pearls. Brief ones, they vanish beneath your touch. Around midday, the breeze freshens slightly. The fog begins lifting almost reluctantly, opening narrow windows across the sea before closing them again. For a few moments you glimpse distant water. Then grey returns. The longship continues patiently. No one attempts to hurry the weather. The smell changes again. Fresh salt grows stronger while the damp earthy scent of mist slowly fades. The sea is breathing differently. The captain notices before anyone else. He raises one hand. Several sailors prepare the sail. Within minutes, the breeze strengthens enough to scatter the remaining fog into long drifting ribbons. Blue sky slowly returns overhead. Sunlight spills across the deck. The crew says almost nothing. They simply continue working as though the hidden world has quietly returned. A curious discussion begins later that afternoon. One sailor recalls hearing about ghost ships that supposedly appeared inside sea fog before disappearing forever once the mist cleared. Another smiles. Perhaps they were only fishermen. The suggestion earns warm laughter. The mystery becomes less frightening, yet somehow no less enjoyable. Historians still argue how often unusual weather conditions contributed to the legend surrounding phantom islands, mysterious coastlines, or ships reported by generations of northern sailors. The sea rarely explains itself completely. Perhaps that is part of its charm. By evening, the horizon stretches clearly in every direction once more. The sun hangs low above the water, turning the gentle swells into glowing paths of gold leading endlessly westward. You inhale deeply. The cool air feels wonderfully fresh after the damp embrace of the morning fog. The older sailor stands beside you once again. Without looking away from the horizon, he quietly says, "The sea hides. Then it reveals nothing more." The simple words remain with you as the longship glides steadily onward. The ocean has taught another quiet lesson today. Not every obstacle demands strength. Some merely ask for patience until the world becomes clear again. The sea greets you with a crisp, brilliant morning. The fog has completely vanished. Every distant wave catches the early sunlight, making the northern ocean sparkle like polished glass scattered with thousands of tiny mirrors. The cool breeze carries the familiar scent of salt. But today it also brings something lighter, freshness. Almost optimism. You rest one hand against the smooth railing while watching the bow divide the water into two graceful streams of white foam. The longship moves confidently, almost effortlessly. After so many days aboard, you have stopped thinking of the vessel as simply wood and iron. It feels more like a trusted companion that understands the sea as well as the people sailing upon it. That thought lingers. It feels appropriate. The captain kneels near the bow beside one of the younger sailors, pointing toward the overlapping wooden planks that form the hull. You quietly move closer. A lesson is about to begin. He places one hand gently against the outside of the ship. She bends. He then presses his palm firmly against a thick oak rib inside the hull. She holds. Only 4 words, yet they explain generations of craftsmanship. Historians generally agree that the clinker-built design of Viking ships represented one of the greatest engineering achievements of early medieval Europe. Each overlapping plank strengthened the next while allowing the hull to flex naturally with heavy seas instead of resisting every wave with rigid force. Strength came from movement, not stiffness. You run your fingers along one of the carefully shaped planks. Its surface feels smooth after years of use, though faint tool marks still remain beneath the layers of protective tear. Someone shaped this board with remarkable patience, perhaps using only an axe, adze, and draw knife. The precision feels astonishing. The captain quietly explains that every tree chosen for shipbuilding mattered. Straight trunks became long planks. Naturally curved branches often formed ribs where the grain already followed the desired shape. Very little was forced. Nature did much of the work. The builders simply understood how to use it. The smell of warm pine grows stronger as sunlight reaches the deck. Mixed with tar and sea salt, it creates an aroma that now instantly reminds you of steady progress across cold northern waters. The scent has become familiar, comforting, even. A sailor removes a small wooden plug from one section of the deck, allowing a little collected water to drain back into the sea. The process takes only moments. Then the plug returns. Tiny details, constant attention. You notice that almost every part of the ship can be repaired using relatively simple tools carried aboard. Wooden pegs replace damaged ones. Leather straps receive fresh bindings. Small cracks are sealed before they become serious. Nothing waits until tomorrow. Maintenance belongs to today. Scholars continue debating exactly how standardized Viking ship construction became across different Scandinavian regions. Archaeological discoveries reveal shared principles, yet local builders often introduce distinctive variations influenced by available timber, coastal conditions, and community traditions. There was no single perfect design, only excellent adaptation. The breeze strengthens enough to fill the sail completely. The mast leans gently before settling into its familiar position. Instead of alarming you, the movement feels reassuring. The ship responds exactly as it should. Everything flexes together. Nothing struggles alone. The captain notices your expression. He smiles quietly. Hard things break, living things bend. His words drift away with the wind. You continue thinking about them long afterward. A curious conversation begins while several sailors inspect spare oars stacked neatly along the gunwale. One sailor claims an old shipbuilder could identify the forest where a plank originated simply by examining the grain of the wood. Another laughs. The oldest crew member merely shrugs. I would not argue. Soft laughter follows. Whether entirely true or slightly exaggerated hardly matters. Respect for skilled builders clearly runs deep. Historians still argue how much specialized knowledge remained within certain shipbuilding families versus spreading more broadly through coastal communities. Much of that practical wisdom disappeared long before anyone thought to record it in writing. Some knowledge survives only through craftsmanship, not books. You help rub a fresh layer of animal fat onto several leather fittings securing the steering oar. The leather feels supple beneath your fingers, still remarkably strong despite constant exposure to cold air and salt water. Nearby, another sailor oils a wooden pulley until it turns almost silently. Every moving part receives care. Nothing earns neglect. The afternoon sun climbs higher than usual for this northern voyage. Although the air remains cool, the gentle warmth drying the deck feels almost luxurious. Several sailors remove their outer cloaks briefly. Only briefly. Experience has taught them not to trust comfort for too long. The northern sea enjoys surprises. A large swell lifts the ship without warning, instead of crashing heavily. The hull rises smoothly before settling back into the water with graceful flexibility. You barely lose your balance. Several days ago you certainly would have. Now your knees instinctively bend with emotion. You have learned from the ship, just as the ship reflects lessons learned from generations before you. The sounds surrounding you blend into a peaceful harmony. The steady hum of the sail, the gentle creak of timber, water brushing rhythmically against the hull, a distant seabird calling somewhere beyond sight. Nothing dominates. Everything belongs. Late in the afternoon, the captain invites you to place one hand against the mast while the wind presses firmly into the sail. You do. A faint vibration travels through the wood into your fingertips. Not violent, almost musical. The entire vessel quietly shares the work of crossing the sea. No single plank bears the burden alone. That realization feels strangely moving. As the sun begins descending toward the western horizon, golden light washes across every surface aboard the longship. The overlapping planks glow warmly. The iron rivets catch tiny flashes of light. The sail becomes almost translucent. You suddenly understand that this remarkable vessel is more than transportation. It is centuries of observation transformed into wood, countless mistakes corrected, endless experiments refined, thousands of careful decisions shaped by people who respected the sea enough to learn from it instead of trying to conquer it. The longship continues northward with calm confidence. You rest your hand once more upon the weathered hull. It has carried you safely through wind, rain, cold, mist, and open ocean. Without saying a word, the ship continues teaching its oldest lesson. Survival begins long before the voyage ever leaves shore. The next morning brings a subtle change that only the most experienced sailors notice at first. The wind smells different. It still carries the clean scent of salt, yet beneath it lingers something softer, damp earth, pine resin, moss warmed by weak sunlight. Home is somewhere ahead, not visible yet, but close enough for the sea to whisper about it. The captain lifts his face toward the breeze and smiles almost imperceptibly. No announcement follows. There is no need. The crew senses it as well. You breathe deeply. The fragrance is faint, yet unmistakable, after so many days surrounded by nothing except open water. The promise hidden inside that breeze feels almost magical. The longship continues its steady course while gentle waves slide beneath the hull with familiar rhythm. Every creak of timber now sounds comforting instead of mysterious. You know these sounds. They have become part of your days. The morning light gradually brightens, revealing distant patches of darker water where shifting currents twist beneath the surface. The captain studies them carefully, then makes only the slightest adjustment to the steering oar. The vessel responds immediately. You barely notice the turn. Small corrections prevent large mistakes. Historians generally agree that successful Viking voyages depended upon constant attention rather than dramatic acts of navigation. Experienced captains rarely waited until problems became obvious. They corrected their course little by little throughout the journey. Patience guided the ship, not sudden decisions. A flock of seabirds suddenly appears ahead. Unlike the wandering birds encountered in open water, these fly with clear purpose, repeatedly circling in one direction before disappearing beyond the horizon. Several sailors exchange knowing glances. The birds belong somewhere. Land cannot be far away. The air grows slightly warmer as the afternoon approaches. Not warm enough to remove your wool cloak entirely, but enough that the cold no longer presses against every exposed finger. The difference feels gentle, almost kind. You rest beside the gunwale while watching sunlight sparkle across the sea. The water looks familiar now. Its changing colours no longer confuse you. Dark patches suggest deeper currents. Silver streaks reveal shifting winds. White ripples speak quietly about underwater rocks or changing tides. The ocean has become readable, at least a little. The older sailor notices your attention. You see more now. His voice carries quiet satisfaction. You nod. He is right. Several weeks ago the sea appeared empty. Now it feels full of conversations. The waves never stop speaking. Only your understanding changed. Scholars continue debating how much practical seamanship depended upon formal instruction versus simple observation gained through years of repeated voyages. Many historians believe younger sailors gradually absorbed knowledge by watching experienced crew members rather than through lengthy explanations. The sea became the classroom, every voyage another lesson. The smell of drying fish drifts from a nearby storage bundle, while someone carefully divides the midday meal into equal portions. Nothing has changed, yet everything feels different. The routines that once seemed unusual have become ordinary. You no longer think before tightening your cloak against the breeze. You automatically brush seawater from the bench before sitting. Your hands instinctively check knots after securing a rope. Habit quietly replaces effort. A curious story begins after lunch. One sailor remembers his first voyage many years earlier. He admits he spent every night convinced the sea would swallow the ship before morning. The younger crew members smile. He laughs softly at himself. I slept very little. Another sailor replies that everyone begins that way. Even the captain chuckles. Fear belongs at the beginning. Experience slowly escorts it away. Historians still argue how young many Viking sailors began participating in longer expeditions. Archaeological evidence and written sources suggest considerable variation depending upon community, family tradition, and the purpose of individual voyages. Every generation learned differently. The sea remained the same. Clouds gather briefly during the afternoon before drifting apart once again. Their passing shadows sweep across the water like enormous birds gliding silently overhead. The longship continues without interruption. Its steady confidence now feels contagious. You realize something unexpected. You trust it completely, not because danger has disappeared, because the vessel and its crew have repeatedly proven themselves worthy of that trust. A seal surfaces beside the ship for only a heartbeat before vanishing beneath the waves. Several sailors smile warmly. One quietly calls it a good sign. No one argues. Some beliefs require no proof. The breeze strengthens just enough to fill the sail with a deep, satisfying curve. The familiar humming sound returns overhead while the mast answers with a gentle wooden murmur. The music of the ship continues. Every note feels familiar. The afternoon slowly melts into evening. Far ahead, The horizon begins changing once again, not dramatically. Only a faint dark line appears where sea meets sky. You stare carefully. There. It disappears, then returns. Land, still distant, yet undeniably real. The excitement aboard remains wonderfully restrained. No shouting, no celebration, only quiet smiles spreading from one sailor to another. The journey is not ended. It is simply entering its final chapter. The captain studies the coastline with patient concentration while comparing its shape with memories carried through countless earlier voyages. Every hill matters, every cliff, every headland. Landmarks replace open horizons. The older sailor stands beside you as the evening sun paints the distant coast in soft shades of gold. You never forget. He speaks so quietly that the wind almost carries his words away. The first time you see home again, you understand immediately. The sight brings something deeper than relief. It brings gratitude for the ship, for the crew, for every careful decision that transformed freezing seas into another successful voyage. As darkness gently settles across the northern ocean, the coastline grows clearer with every passing mile. The longship glides forward with calm assurance. Behind you lies open water filled with quiet lessons. Ahead waits familiar land. Between the two stands a crew no longer defined simply by endurance, but by the wisdom earned one patient day upon the sea after another. The coastline grows clearer with every passing hour. What first appeared as a faint shadow now reveals rugged cliffs, dark forests, and familiar valleys reaching gently toward the sea. Wisps of morning mist cling to the lower slopes before slowly disappearing beneath the rising sun. The journey's almost over. No one says it aloud. No one needs to. The longship follows the shoreline at a respectful distance, while the captain quietly studies every headland and rocky outcrop. Places that once seemed ordinary now carry fresh meaning after weeks upon the open water. You recognize them too. Not by name, by feeling. The breeze carries a rich mixture of scents that have been absent for many days. Pine forests, wet earth, wood smoke drifting from distant farms, fresh grass warmed by the morning light. The smell almost overwhelms you. It feels wonderfully alive, after breathing nothing but sea air for so long. Each familiar fragrance awakens quiet memories of ordinary life ashore. Home announces itself. Long before you arrive, historians generally agree that Viking sailors often travelled close to coastlines whenever practical, using familiar landmarks to confirm their position while reducing unnecessary risks. A recognisable hill, a distinctive cliff, the mouth of a river, each became another trusted guide. The sea no longer feels endless. It has returned you. You lean against the gunwale, watching small fishing birds dive effortlessly into the shallows near the coast. Their quick movements contrast with the patient rhythm of the longship. Everything here feels busier. The land never truly rests. You hear distant gulls calling from rocky islands somewhere farther inland. The faint bark of a dog drifts across the water before fading into the breeze. The sounds surprise you. The open ocean had grown so quiet that even ordinary noises now seem wonderfully rich. The crew moves through familiar routines one final time. The sail receives another careful adjustment. Water barrels are secured. Loose ropes are neatly coiled. No one becomes careless simply because the destination lies nearby. The voyage ends only after the ship rests safely ashore. Until then, discipline remains. The older sailor quietly wipes a thin layer of salt from the steering oar with a wool cloth. You smile. He notices. Salt waits for no one. He runs his hand along the smooth wood. Better today than tomorrow. The lesson applies to more than boats. Small tasks rarely improve through delay. Scholars continue discussing how Viking crews balance long-distance exploration with seasonal responsibilities back home. Many sailors were also farmers, fishers, craftsmen, or traders whose lives followed the changing rhythm of the year. The sea claimed only part of their lives. The land completed the rest. As the sun climbs higher, you begin noticing tiny signs of human activity along the coast. Thin trails winding through the trees, A small pasture where sheep graze peacefully, smoke rising from a distant hall. Each detail feels surprisingly comforting. Civilization returns quietly, not dramatically. The smell of fresh bread seems almost imaginable, though the breeze likely carries nothing more than wood smoke and damp earth. Your memory happily supplies the rest. A curious conversation begins while several sailors prepare the mooring lines. One younger crew member asks whether the sea ever feels easier after so many voyages. The older sailor laughs softly. The sea? Never. We do. Everyone smiles. The answer feels exactly right. The Northern Ocean has not changed. The people crossing it have. Historians still argue how much practical knowledge accumulated through repeated voyages could be passed successfully from one generation to another without written manuals. Oral tradition, demonstration, and shared experience almost certainly carried much of that remarkable expertise. Knowledge lived inside people, not parchment. The afternoon light turns warm and golden as the familiar fjord finally opens before you. The entrance appears narrow compared with the vast ocean beyond it. Steep rocky walls shelter the calm water inside like welcoming arms. The change feels immediate. The wind softens. The waves grow smaller. The ship glides almost silently. You suddenly realize how noisy the open sea had truly been. This quiet feels different, gentler. Several seabirds circle overhead before settling upon nearby rocks. They seem completely unconcerned by the returning vessel. Perhaps they remember it, or perhaps they simply belong here. The captain lowers the sail while the crew quietly prepares the oars for one final stretch. Pull, recover, pull, recover. The familiar rhythm echoes between the cliffs instead of disappearing into open water. Every splash returns softly. The sound feels strangely intimate. You pass small coves where clear streams tumble into the fjord. Moss-covered stones line the shoreline, their deep green colour almost startling after weeks surrounded by blue and grey. The landscape seems brighter than you remembered. Perhaps home always does. The older sailor gestures toward a weathered cliff overlooking the water. My father taught me there. He says no more. You imagine a younger version of him standing upon those rocks decades earlier, watching another longship disappear toward the horizon. One day he became the sailor leaving. Now he has returned. The cycle continues. A group of children suddenly appears along the shoreline, waving excitedly as the longship approaches. Their laughter carries clearly across the calm water. Several crew members raise their hands in greeting. Smiles spread naturally. No ceremony, only quiet happiness. The smell of wood smoke grows stronger with every passing minute. Somewhere nearby, evening meals are already being prepared. You can almost hear doors opening, dogs barking, families talking. Ordinary life continues. You understand now that this ordinary life is exactly what every careful voyage protected. Not glory, not adventure alone, simply the chance to come home safely. The longship rounds one final bend in the fjord. Familiar buildings come into view beneath the soft afternoon light. You feel no triumphant excitement, only peaceful gratitude. The cold sea has shared its lessons generously. Patience, preparation, discipline, cooperation, respect. Each one now travels home with you, carried as surely as any cargo resting quietly inside the weathered hull. The longship glides gently toward the familiar landing place where the voyage first began. Nothing about the shoreline has changed, yet everything about you has. The same cliffs rise above the quiet fjord. The same pine trees sway in the cool breeze. Thin columns of wood smoke drift lazily into the afternoon sky, carrying the warm scent of burning timber that seemed almost impossible to imagine during the coldest nights at sea. Home waits patiently, as though you had never left. The captain gives one final quiet command. The oars dip into the calm water together. Pull, recover. Pull, recover. Their rhythm feels slower now, not because the crew has grown tired, but because there is no longer any need to hurry. The journey has already succeeded. You watch the shoreline drawing closer with every stroke. Familiar rocks emerge beneath the clear water. Small fishing boats rest quietly near the beach, gently rocking with the tide. Children wave from the shore. Older villagers pause in their work to watch the longship return. No grand celebration unfolds. Life simply welcomes its travellers home. Historians generally agree that the greatest achievement of any Viking voyage was not reaching a distant destination. It was returning safely with both crew and ship intact. Every successful homecoming strengthened families, communities, and the knowledge that would guide future generations across the northern seas. A safe return mattered most. Everything else came after. The hull slides softly onto the gravel beach with a familiar sound of wood meeting stone. Several sailors step into the shallow water, steadying the vessel while others secure thick ropes around weathered wooden posts. The ship finally rests, after weeks of constant motion. The stillness feels almost strange. You climb onto the shore and pause. For just a moment, your legs expect the ground to rise and fall beneath you. Instead, the earth remains perfectly steady. The sensation makes you smile. The older sailor notices. It fades. He laughs quietly, but never completely. You believe him. The smell of damp soil and fresh grass surrounds you. Somewhere nearby, bread is baking, a dog barks happily before racing toward the returning crew. Sheep graze peacefully on a nearby hillside, paying little attention to the excitement below. Ordinary sounds, ordinary sights. They suddenly feel extraordinary. Several sailors immediately begin unloading supplies. Water barrels are rolled ashore. Coils of rope are carried toward nearby storage sheds. The sail is carefully folded with the same patience that carried it safely across the sea. The voyage may be finished. The work continues. Nothing aboard the longship is abandoned. Every oar receives inspection. Every leather strap is checked for wear. Salt is washed from tools before it can slowly damage them. Preparation for the next voyage begins today, not tomorrow. Scholars continue debating exactly how much accumulated seamanship changed over the centuries through small improvements rather than dramatic inventions. Shipbuilders refined designs. Sailors discovered better habits. Communities remembered both successful ideas and costly mistakes. Progress moved quietly, one voyage at a time. A curious story is shared while everyone works. A young child asks one of the sailors whether the sea was frightening. The sailor thinks for a moment before answering. Sometimes. Were you brave? The sailor smiles. Most days. I was prepared. The child nods thoughtfully. The adults nearby smile as well. The distinction feels important. Throughout this journey, you have learned that surviving icy seas without fire depended upon hundreds of ordinary decisions rather than impossible acts of courage. Warm wool carefully layered before dawn. Dry clothing protected whenever sunshine appeared. Food rich enough to keep the body's own furnace burning. Steady rowing that created precious warmth. Shared effort replacing lonely struggle. Patient observation of birds, waves, currents, clouds, and wind. Quiet maintenance performed before problems became dangerous. A remarkable ship built by hands that understood wood as deeply as they understood the sea. No single secret existed, only countless practical habits working together. Historians still argue about many details of Viking navigation, daily routines, and traditions at sea. New archaeological discoveries continue adding pieces to the puzzle, while leaving other questions wonderfully unanswered. Perhaps that uncertainty is fitting. The sea rarely reveals everything. You walk one last time beside the weathered longship. Its hull bears fresh scratches from distant shores. Salt crystals sparkle along the lower planks. The sail rests neatly folded, waiting patiently for another season. You place your hand upon the smooth timber. It feels cool beneath your fingertips. Familiar. Trustworthy. For a brief moment. You remember the nervous traveller who first stepped aboard beside this very beach. That person wondered how anyone could survive freezing seas without the comfort of fire. Now you know. The answer was never hidden inside one clever invention. It lived inside preparation, inside cooperation, inside respect for nature, inside generations of quiet knowledge patiently handed from one sailor to the next. The cold remained cold. The sea remained powerful. The Vikings simply learned how to belong there. The evening slowly settles across the fjord as golden light softens the cliffs and gentle ripples fade into still water. The village grows quieter with every passing moment, while the faithful longship rests peacefully beside the shore that welcomed it home. You carry the steady rhythm of waves, the whisper of northern winds, and the quiet wisdom of careful hands with you. As the stars begin appearing above the calm sea, you let every memory drift gently away, knowing that even the longest voyage eventually finds its peaceful harbour. Rest now, and let the northern tide carry your thoughts into gentle sleep.